Chapter 510 Blessed with Luck. Lu Yi finished unlocking the magical seals of the storage bags while they chatted. The number of enemies was only 5, but the amount of storage bags that Yi had recovered was a good 20 odd of them. The 5 did not need so many storage bags. Most cultivators had no more than 3 storage bags for convenience and classification of their items and equipment. Yet they had more than 20 bags in all, and Lu Yi could only think of one reason. These must be the bags they had looted off other poor victims they had waylaid, and they had now become Lu Ye's prize. Lu Yi picked out 10 of the storage bags and slid the rest to Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan, which Li Baxin did not decline. As brothers in arms, there was no need to be coy. He took the storage bags and emptied them all. Lu Yi did the same. There wasn't anything remarkably precious to be expected, just some usual supplies that could be useful. There were items such as spirit artifacts and supplies that he could sell off for contribution points, but some he might take back to the main stronghold of his sect. Most Cloud River Realm cultivators used middle-grade spirit artifacts, and hence they could fetch very good prices. He went on searching through the pile of loot until he found a tiny little box glowing with an iridescent luminescence. He recognized what it was, a box containing an amulet. Without thinking further, Lu Yi flipped the lid open and a bluish glow came pouring out. "God, you really have great luck, brother," Li Baxin moaned with amazement. Both he and Feng Yuechan had their own share of good luck since entering the Cloud River battlefield. In fact, he still had 3 boxes containing amulets himself, although he had never once gotten anything beyond a green amulet thus far. He had spoken to others at length about the unpredictability of such boxes, which were more commonly known as amulet chests. The chest was enchanted by the powers of the heavens, the de facto entity shrouded with an enigma that governed all things, to grant its opener an amulet of varying quality depending on their luck. It could be a gold, although the possibility would be absurdly slim. Even a purple amulet would be rare enough. Most cultivators expected to get a white or a green. Some with better luck might see a blue. That was why Li Baxin had decided to gather as many amulet caskets as possible and open them all together. Maybe that way he could obtain a good amulet. If he could not rely on his luck to provide him with a good amulet, then perhaps a bigger number of tries could tip the scales. But right here, right now, Lu Yi had stumbled on a blue amulet right off the bat. "I think my luck has been good since receiving the gift of Providence when I was making my ascension to the Cloud River realm. That last time when I discovered that pocket dimension I told you about, I found a magic that could manipulate the traits of a spirit beast. A stranger told me that selling it to the Vault of Providence would earn me the heaven's blessings, meaning that my luck would increase, and that was what I did." "Wait, you got the gift of Providence?" Li Baxin yelped. That was the first time he heard about this. With him and Feng Yuechan already inside the Cloud River battlefield, Li Baxin was deprived of any fresh news from the real world of Jiuzhou and everywhere else outside the battlefield. "Yeah. That explains it. Teacher had told me a long time ago that senior brother Feng, who was the last person to receive the gift of Providence, had enjoyed a tremendous run of good luck after that. Anything he did, as if he had the help of the heavens themselves, would just work. That was how he became so feared and respected that at one point he wielded as much power and authority as the chief of the Grand Sky Coalition. So it was not just some fairy tale then. Then he had an idea. He extracted all 3 amulet caskets from inside his storage bag and handed them to Lu Yi. "Try opening these for me, Lu Yi." Knowing that Lu Yi has been blessed with tremendous luck, letting him open the amulet caskets might be a good idea. There was a possibility of getting a gold amulet. That reminded Lu Yi about Xia Chanchan. She too had asked him to open her amulet casket just a few days ago. Instead of being able to make use of his good fortune, all she got was just a white amulet. 3 pairs of eyes stared intently. Lu Yi placed a hand on the first casket and flipped open the lid. A wash of white-hot phosphorescent came gushing out. Lu Ye's brow cocked with interest. Peculiar. Up until today he had opened a total of 4 amulet caskets. The first one was his and it yielded a purple amulet. The next one was Xia Chanchan's, which spouted a white one. The third one, which was the one just now, gave him a blue amulet. Now this, another white. If the first time's a coincidence, what about this time? "It's fine. Fortune can turn on a dime, brother." "Let's try the next one," said Li Baxin. Lu Yi hesitated. "Can you give these 2 caskets to me, brother?" he asked gingerly. "No problem. They're yours. If I had known about this, I would have tried to save more amulet caskets for you." Lu Yi did not wait. He was already opening the lid of the next casket. An emerald green glow came pouring out. A green amulet. Mediocre but still acceptable. Then the last casket. A breathtakingly rich violet incandescence blazed from within as soon as the lid cracked open, casting a purplish sheen on everyone's amazed countenance. "Incredible!" exclaimed Li Baxin in disbelief. Even Feng Yuechan's eyes were the size of eggs. No one had expected that he would get a purple amulet, 27 times more valuable than a white, on his third try. Seeing really is believing, and witnessing Lu Ye's extraordinarily remarkable fortune up close and in the flesh, one could well comprehend what an incredible boon the gift of Providence was. Barely a month ago, Li Baxin was just telling Feng Yuechan how it could be easier to find a four-leaf clover than expect amulet caskets to yield any amulets purple or beyond. A blue moon comes around about as often as such an improbable occurrence. Yet here, after almost 30 days, fate had elected to prove him wrong. Lu Yi slid the caskets containing both the green amulet and purple amulet back to Li Baxin. The latter peered at him incredulously. "I think it only works when I'm opening my own amulet caskets. If I'm opening it on behalf of someone else, my good luck wouldn't work." That was why he asked Li Baxin to give him both the amulet caskets in the first place, he explained further. It was only to verify his guess. It could not be just mere coincidence when every single casket that he opened for others only yielded white amulets while those that belonged to him provided better rewards. But this proved his hypothesis. Whatever good luck the heavens had bestowed him with, it would only work for his benefit and his alone. Anyone thinking of exploiting this extraordinary providence through him would be sorely disappointed. Li Baxin peered at the amulet caskets and shook his head. "No, brother. I cannot take them." Lu Yi was about to protest, but Li Baxin stopped him. Smiling, he said, "I understand, brother. But luck is something intangible that you can't see or feel. If your current string of good luck is really a result of you receiving the gift of Providence, then you should be even more careful. The reach of the entity we know as the heavens is far and boundless. Any form of perfidious manipulation or deceitful trickery in the use of this extraordinary luck you now embody might be seen as a slight towards this omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient being. That could affect the favor you now have with the heavens or worse, see you ruined." "What? Is that true?" Lu Yi yelped with trepidation. "It's prudent to practice caution," said Li Baxin pensively. When it came to the heavens, he would rather tread carefully than make flippant and sloppy mistakes. Not even the slightest one. Li Baxin would have readily pounced on the offer of a purple amulet if it were anyone else. The amulet would have ensured a huge increase in his power. But this was Lu Yi, his own brother-in-arms that he owed his loyalty to. He could not just sit and watch him commit what could be a disastrous mistake. "He's right, Lu Yi," added Feng Yuechan. "We can't be too careful with issues of such gravity. In the future, be wary of anyone wanting to make use of your extraordinary fortune for their own gain. You could put yourself at great risk." Lu Yi nodded. "Very well. I'll keep the amulets. But you'll keep the rest of the loot." He pushed the pile of storage bags which was his portion of the bounty towards them. This time Li Baxin proffered no objection. Satisfied, he picked up the pouches piecemeal and appended each of them to empty their contents. Lu Yi examined the insides of his own storage bag. He had several amulets in total, 1 gold, 1 purple, 1 blue, 1 green and a couple of whites, all of which should be enough for him to make it to the 4th order. He had progressed enough and it wouldn't be too long before he reached the next order, which would have to wait until the Carnage Colosseum ended. To consume amulets required time, a commodity that could be viewed as a luxury in the Colosseum. A white amulet needed barely a quarter of an hour, but a gold amulet would take at least a day and night to fully assimilate, and the process could not be interrupted. Any disturbance could cause terrible losses. Therefore the best solution would be to wait until the Colosseum had ended, then Lu Yu could start searching for a hidden and secure location. In that case, brother, you could just purchase any number of amulet caskets. Try to get as many as possible in the price range of green amulets. With your luck, you might have quite a haul waiting to drop on your lap, Li Baxin suggested suddenly. Green amulet? That would just be around 600 to 700 contribution points in that case, quipped Feng Yuechan, chuckling. That's not a number of points that Cloud River Realm cultivators would hanker after. Therefore no. Amulet caskets gotta be higher than that. Remember, every single casket represents a cultivator's chance, however small it might be, to procure a gold amulet. If anyone's gonna sell caskets away for 600 to 700 contribution points, then they might as well just open the caskets themselves. Who knows? The heavens might somehow take a liking to them and drop them a gold one. Li Baxin thought about what she said and felt she had a point. You're right. That was true. Even he himself, now that he thought of it, would be reluctant to part with an amulet casket for a measly 600 to 700 contribution points. Like Feng Yuechan said, every casket represented hope. An amulet casket might reveal a gold amulet, and if this did really happen right after he had sold his casket to someone else, he would suffer a stroke. To say nothing of the fact that amulets remained an important if not one of the few ways cultivators relied upon to progress. Most people immediately opened their caskets as soon as they found one, which would make amulet caskets a rare commodity to be offered up for sale. Hence, the idea of purchasing more amulet caskets was a dead end. While some cultivators could be tempted to part with their amulet caskets at the offer of a price that equaled blue amulets, there was no absolute certainty in whether transactions like this would be profitable or not. Nevertheless, that anyone would sell off their caskets in the first place remained a very, very big if. With the distribution of the loot, the amulet caskets were all opened, the looted storage bags emptied and their contents tucked away, completed. Li Baxin singled out one of the storage bags filled with more spirit pills and stones before tossing it to Lu Yi. Without waiting for a reply, Li Baxin pointed out, "It's filled with ward flags." Lu Yi disavowed any thought of protesting. He peered inside. There really were several dozens of ward flags inside, making this the storage bag that once belonged to the ward cultivator he slew. Lu Yi had a good many ward flags before, but recent use had pretty much exhausted his supply, and this could not have come at a better time. He did not decline the offer and put away the storage bag. "So, what are your plans after this, brother?" Li Baxin asked. "Well, at first I was thinking of laying low here until the Colosseum ended. If anything happened, I'd just escape using these teleportation wards." "And now?" Li Baxin's brow cocked. He could hear that Lu Yi had something else in mind. Lu Yi sighed. Quietly he admitted, "Well, about that. There is something else that I've not yet told you about. I think the name now at the number 1 spot of the Carnage roster is mine." Chapter 511 I'm number 1. Inside the vastness of the underground cavern, Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan were staring blankly at Lu Yi. Seconds ticked by in silence before the stillness broke with Li Baxin uttering his question, "Wait. I thought you said that it was someone else." "That was what I thought at first. By my calculations before, I did not have that many Carnage points. The name in the first place has 1,000 points more than what I estimated I should have. It was after I killed those 2 Fifth Orders, I noticed that the Carnage points for the name in the first place rose by 240. They harked back at the fight just now. 5 assailants had waylaid Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan when they were coming here. One of them had already been killed by Li Baxin when Lu Yi arrived at the scene. Lu Yi first ambushed the 5th Order ward cultivator before he took down another 5th Order. That added 2 notches to his belt. As a 3rd Order, killing a pair of 5th Orders who were beyond his rank would earn him 120 Carnage points apiece. The name in the first place of the Carnage roster had 1,550 points when Lu Yi last checked. But after he had slain the 5th Orders, the tally had risen 240 points, making the total 1,790 points. With how he could no longer find his name amongst the 90-somethings, Lu Yi could only conclude that he really was number 1 on the Carnage roster. The amount of Carnage points rising definitely wasn't a coincidence. "But you said that the amount is 1,000 more than what you've calculated?" "Oh," pointed out Li Baxin. "Well, I can only think of one reason." Lu Yi extracted the gold amulet he stored inside his storage sphere. "It should be because of this," he said, referring to the amulet. "The heavens pick someone every day for this. Within the first 24 hours this amulet can't be used, it can't be kept inside another dimension, and only after the 24 hours duration will the amulet be truly yours. I was picked once." Li Baxin pondered on other possible origins of the 1,000 Carnage points. Lu Yi was similarly incredulous himself, but he was convinced that his theory was right. It was a pity that the trove of information that he purchased from the Divine Trade Association did not include anything like this, or he would have been able to make sure. A 1,000 Carnage points difference. The amount itself was too large for a mistake. "Let me ask around," Feng Yuechan added suddenly, and she began communicating with other people. Li Baxin wasn't a very popular figure within the membership of the Devoted Ones, but Feng Yuechan was an altogether different case. Her pedigree, beautiful looks and grace, as well as her talents had made her a favorite to everyone in the order. For more than a decade she had watched scores of Devoted Ones leaving the Spirit Creek battlefield while she stayed back. By now, there were many who had reached 8th and 9th Order, and they had to know enough about the Carnage Colosseum. She got an answer quickly enough. Gold amulets bestowed by the heavens do indeed come with carnage point rewards, and the points awarded commensurate with one's rank of cultivation and the duration of one's possession of the amulet. The lower your rank is and the longer the duration of your possession, the more carnage points you'll get. A third order who had held on to the gold amulet for 24 hours. No one else across the real world of Jianghu save Lu Yi could have accomplished such a deed. No other third order could have survived the 4 instances of onslaught that happened after each time the amulet's eruption of spiritual power broadcasted his position. No third order could have fended off the attacks by so many enemy cultivators and still lived to see the next morning. Yet Lu Yi managed to survive, and it was the success of such an impossible mission that had seen him being awarded 1,000 carnage points. That propelled him to the top of the carnage roster while leaving the first runner-up and the former leader of the roster miles behind. With this being the second day of the Carnage Coliseum, there was one more gold amulet that was bestowed to an unknown cultivator. The gold amulet changed hands several times in the 24-hour duration until it fell into the hands of an 8th order who managed to hold on to it for the last 4 hours, winning both the amulet and 300 carnage points. Naturally, Lu Yi knew nothing about this. He had been busy skittering across the length and breadth of the terrain, searching for places to plant his booby traps and teleportation wards. That was marvelous. Li Baxin rubbed his palms expectantly. For most third orders, being bestowed a gold amulet by the heavens in the Carnage Coliseum was synonymous with being given a death sentence. But to Lu Yi, it posed no more danger than a walk through a minefield, but with all the astute preparations Lu Yi had done, the teleportation wards and the many explosive wards to protect them, the risk had been reduced to nil. That made this 1,000 carnage points practically a free gift from the heavens. Li Baxin began to comprehend the extent of Lu Ye's good fortune. Well, my initial plan was to hide here for the sake of my safety. I thought that I might only come out after the Colosseum was over. But now, I'm beginning to think if winning the Colosseum might be a realistic prospect. The number 1 spot on the Carnage roster. The reward would be a Primus-level Wisp of Sanctification and 9 gold amulets, prizes that anyone would gladly die for. Which was one of the best kinds of rewards that Lu Yi could ever dream of. He could still remember the experience of losing that Tertius-level arcane glade. But he did not feel sorry at all. If anything, a Tertius-level arcane glade that had limited growth potential was more of a burden than a boon to him. But a Primus-level arcane glade would be different. Immensely different. While having one might not be urgent to him, it would definitely be a great help to Li Baxin, Feng Yuechan, and also Zhu Jia. Having an arcane glade in this class would make it easier for them. They would no longer have to roam around looking for rewards and prizes while endangering themselves. Though this would still be slower than using amulets, it would be safer and steadier. However, what mattered the most to Lu Yi were the 9 gold amulets. At present, Lu Yi had enough amulets to reach the 4th order. But he was still in dire need of more to get stronger. Needless to say, it was Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan's presence that had given him both the courage and confidence to conceive the inspiration of winning the Carnage Coliseum. They were hardly the average garden-variety Cloud River Realm cultivators, and even though they were just 4th orders, they could easily give opponents 2 ranks beyond a run for their money. If he could work with them and win the first prize, he could divide the prize evenly with them. That would mean 3 gold amulets apiece, a prize that would make him progress even faster through the 4th order and save him a lot of time and trouble. In the meantime, he had to admit that he might very well be one of the weakest cultivators now in the Carnage Coliseum in terms of his cultivation rank. Nevertheless, to him this could also be a form of advantage. An advantage in the form of gaining extra carnage points whenever he slayed an enemy. Like contribution points, more carnage points would be awarded if he were to kill an enemy if compared to Li Baxin killing one. In other words, with most of the enemies in the Colosseum being 8th and 9th orders, Lu Yi could slay an enemy 5th order and he would receive 3 times what most people earned when they also slayed a 5th order. If he slayed a 6th order, others would have to slay 4 to catch up. Hence, while it was easy for 8th and 9th orders to kill enemies weaker than them, the gain in carnage points for Lu Yi would increase to commensurate with the difference between his cultivation rank and his opponents. That would make this an advantage to Lu Yi in comparison since he possessed the power to defeat opponents of ranks higher than his. With his prowess, he could easily have any ordinary 5th orders for breakfast, and the addition of Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan now made even defeating 6th orders a virtual certainty. As for enemies of the 7th order and beyond, Lu Yi decided that they should avoid crossing paths with any if able. That would leave 8th and 9th orders untouchable. All 3 of them would never be able to defeat one, even on their best days. The difference was just too great, but so long as ample arrangements had been set in place, Lu Yi was at least sure that they would be able to escape unscathed. It was the moment when he realized that he was number one on the Carnage roster, plus the rendezvous with Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan, that the embers of his ambition were lit. Even so, Lu Yi understood fully how risky and dangerous this daring do was going to be and how they needed to be extremely careful moving forward. So, you're thinking of going for the top spot, brother? Li Baxin's brows peaked with apparent exhilaration. It would have been a fool's errand if the situation were otherwise, but with him now already in first place with such a huge lead, it seemed realistic. All they had to do was defend and maintain their lead until the end of the Colosseum. So be it then, brother. If winning this Colosseum is what you wish, said Li Baxin with enthusiasm, then both Yuechan and I will give you all the help you need. Well, for starters, I'd need your help watching the place while I fashion more ward flags. He might have just obtained a fresh supply of ward flags from the belongings of the poor ward cultivator he had slain, but it wouldn't be enough. With full anticipation of pandemonium, especially since all three of them were weaker in comparison to other contestants of the Colosseum, he would need even more ward flags to create some insurance. Only with enough ward flags could he construct more magical wards which would be critical for his plan to work and to ensure everyone's safety. Which was the paramount concern of all, since champions and elites of the 8th and 9th Order teamed the vast length and width of the Colosseum. The materials that he had bought from the Divine Trade Association were still plenty. He could still forge several hundred ward flags with them. But the process would involve the emission of spiritual power and that might invite unwanted attention. To that end, Lu Yi had to construct another magical ward, one with the express purpose of masking any spiritual power signature. So long as he could keep the emissions to a minimum, they would be able to stay undetected. Time passed slowly as Lu Yi went to work with Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan resting and recuperating while they stood vigil. The materials depleted quickly enough and the ward flags grew from stacks into heaps and into mounds. In the meantime, the carnage outside never stopped. Champions and elites waged war on each other, doing their best to improve their ranks on the carnage roster. That included Xiao Liang, currently the roster's number 2 and a champion of the Raving Bladesmen who had ascended into the Cloud River realm with 360 spiritual points unlocked. He was unequivocally and undeniably the most dangerous cultivator in the Colosseum. He was outscored by Lu Yi when the Carnage roster first appeared, although he quickly caught up and locked the first place up by killing and maiming non-stop until Lu Yi overtook him again, this time by a mile because of the 1000 Carnage points increment, and left him in the second place for good. Xiao Liang had never felt so humiliated and exasperated before. If he had been suspecting that the Lu Yi in the first place could be the rumored Lu Yi of the Crimson Blood sect, he was definitely sure of it now. The 1000 Carnage point increment was all the proof Xiao Liang needed to be sure that Lu Yi wasn't a high-tier Cloud River realm cultivator. This matched all the information he had received about the young Crimson Blood sect acolyte, although he could not yet explain how Lu Yi had succeeded in holding on to the special gold amulet for the whole 24 hours. He had been actively scouring the Colosseum for signs of Lu Yi, but his search had yet to turn up anything useful. The vastness of the Colosseum's area was not as big as he feared, however. It was still wide enough for anyone to hide unless he had the means to pinpoint his quarry. At any rate, Xiao Liang was certain that Lu Yi was weaker than him. The skulking weakling must be cowering somewhere, hiding like a rodent in its lair. Which was true. For one day and night, Lu Yi's Carnage points remained unchanged at 1,790, while his had risen up to 1,600. Just a few more kills and he would catch up and regain the top spot. Chapter 512 The Hunt. Lu Yi was finally ready. So were Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan. With tons worth of ward flags sitting in mountains inside the subterranean cavern, they were ready to rumble. They stood up together. Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan both extracted something together and slapped it on their faces. Lu Yi looked. Face masks. Li Baxin's was a rosy-lipped and ivory-teethed mask of a boy grinning whilst Feng Yuechan's was one depicting a tearful girl with a mourning and baleful expression. Li Baxin extracted and offered one more to Lu Yi. Here, take this one. Makes it easier for us to operate. Without a word, Lu Yi retrieved from inside his storage sphere a face mask with the visage of a hideous and fanged demon and put it on. Li Baxin was surprised, but he quickly burst into a giggle. I see. You've come prepared. All three of them were being targeted by cultivators of the Thousand Demon Rich. It was only natural and expected that all three of them would share the same idea of preparing enough face masks for their own use. They got out of the cave and kept their spiritual power signatures low, then they chose a bearing and headed that way. Their motive might be to secure Lu Ye's lead on the first place of the Carnage roster, but safety remained their first and foremost concern, meaning that they would be operating within range of this cave. If anything were to happen, this cave would be the point where they would retreat. Too far and they might not be able to make it back here safely. That way they could fall back to the cave if they encountered enemies beyond their ability to defeat and use the teleportation wards to escape. Hence, the ideal range would be 10 to a dozen miles. But that would greatly limit the scope of their operations. They could only wait for potential targets to pass by instead of launching attacks on others freely. Lu Yi had shared his ideas of sticking within range of the cave with Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan prior to setting off, and they agreed to the idea. While they could plead guilty to feeling enticed by the prizes of winning first place, they acknowledged the soundness of his idea that safety would remain their paramount concern. Launching attacks might provide a lot of initiative, but it could also be risky all the same. But now that they had formulated a plan, all they needed to do was stick to it. They stopped a quarter of an hour later, hardly 20 miles away from the cave. Lu Yi studied the surroundings and gave a couple of curt nods to Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. There was no need for further communication. The latter two sped away in different directions where they would maintain a perimeter. At the same time, Yi materialized and headed in a third direction, doing the same. Alone, Lu Yi extracted his ward flags one after another and began constructing a magical ward. He was going to build wards not for killing but for restraining enemies. That could buy them some time while they escaped if they were to encounter anyone too powerful or dangerous. The ward would be manually activated, not automatically triggered. That would ensure that it could be used to its greatest effect at the right moment. Every now and then, elite cultivators might zip by overhead. But thanks to the perimeter maintained by the others, the early warning they provided allowed Lu Yi to keep himself invisible to prevent detection. Constructing the magical wards took 2 hours. With the preparations now completed, everyone waited in hiding. It had been 3 days since the Carnage Coliseum first opened, and many cultivators had chosen to band up and move around in groups. Despite receiving fewer rewards individually, this could at least provide greater protection. Those who still roamed around alone were at least 7th orders. Confident enough about themselves, only they could move around alone without fear of being in danger. Silence pervaded the forest where they remained patiently in waiting. High up in the sky, changes never stopped occurring to the blood-red pennant that was the Carnage roster, with Xiao Liang swiftly and steadily raking in spades after spades of Carnage points in his race to the top. At his current pace, it would not be long before he caught up with Lu Yi and overtook him. 2 hours turned into 4. The idle vigil remained a fruitless, if futile, wait. They sat on pins and needles as the waiting game became a frustrating and seemingly endless ordeal. There were still a huge number of cultivators around, but the vastness of the Colosseum made everyone scatter, especially with the need to maintain caution. Hardly anyone was eager to reveal themselves. More so, ghost cultivators who flit from hither to thither unseen and unnoticed. All of a sudden, a flicker of light crept into his sight. Lu Yi panned his gaze that way, and there it was, a tiny speck of white light bobbing lazily just under a tree not far away from his position. He was sure that it was not there moments ago. It had just appeared. Just like that. And he knew what it was. That had to be another one of those prizes that the heavens scatter all around the Colosseum every now and then, an endowment. He had encountered one before which gave him a white amulet. So this is how endowments appear. Lu Yi realized, gaining a deeper understanding of how cruel and callous the enigmatic entity the heavens could be. Every day the heavens would select a person and bestow them a golden amulet. Every day the token of providence spectacle, another contrivance of the heavens, would take place to distribute amulets to anyone nearby. Aside from all those events were also random endowments like this, to say nothing of the Carnage roster that hung high up in the sky for everyone to see. All these events existed only for one reason, to incite skirmishes and conflicts amongst all cultivators in the vicinity. The heavens were like an invisible hand, prodding the cultivators so that more blood could be spilled everywhere in the Colosseum. "Brother?" Li Baxian's message came suddenly. "Yeah, I saw it," Lu Yi responded. What was initially a futile wait had just changed into a real hunt, despite his earlier concern that this was going to be a fruitless wild goose chase. And true enough, merely a few minutes later, Lu Yi spied 4 figures appearing in the distance. Carefully and meticulously, the 4 had separated into groups of 2 that approached from 2 different directions. But without the abilities unique only to ghost cultivators, they could not fully mask their tracks. Keeping their spiritual power signatures as low as possible was pretty much everything they could do. Patiently, these strangers did not make a beeline straight for the white speck of light. Instead, they moved inward very slowly as if they were scanning for booby traps. The strangers would have discovered Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan with such cautious methods. But fortunately, Lu Yi had earlier constructed magical wards that could mask their spiritual power signatures to a great extent that so long as the enemies did not have extraordinarily acute spiritual senses, they would not be detected. With glyph concealment, Lu Yi himself was as undetectable as a ghost cultivator. Two of them passed just 10 meters away from Lu Yi's position without noticing anything, while the remaining two were heading straight towards Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan's position. "I'm gonna make the first strike, brother," Li Baxin communicated again. Lu Yi did not respond. He was not at all perturbed by the number of enemies. That these enemies operated in a group indicated a certain possibility that they might not be high-tier cultivators. If anything, Lu Yi would be more worried if it were just a lone cultivator who came. A flash of light slashed through the gloomy dimness of the jungle, followed closely by a piercing ring of steel as Li Baxin broke cover. More than a dozen shafts of light hovered in the air like a bunch of swarming wasps, and, as one, they barreled straight after one of the strangers. The sudden attack caught all four strangers unaware, the ones heading towards Li Baxin most of all. Their faces fell with shock and awe that gripped them. Right in that second, their hair stood on end as they felt danger. True and overwhelming danger. One of them cried, "Ambush!" Every one of them produced their weapons and brandished them at the massing shafts of light streaking towards them. There was no telling to which faction the four strangers belonged. But Li Baxin, after his long years of experience as a sword cultivator, could freely control his many shafts of light as if they were the very digits on his hand, and he could stop them before committing any mistakes the moment he realized who they were. Which happened fast enough. The moment the skirmish broke out, he saw who they were. If they were Grand Sky Coalition allies, Li Baxin would immediately stand down. But if they were Thousand Demon Ridge enemies, then the initiative could ensure that he could at least cut down one opponent in the first exchange itself. The moment the word ambush left the stranger's lips, the truth was revealed. Both red and blue blazed brightly in the gloominess of the jungle. Launching the attack was hardly the only thing Li Baxin was doing. Looking and observing, he was trying to make out the ranks of the four strangers. The sudden ambush would have easily rattled them enough to display their power fully. And he was right, there was nothing for him to be afraid of. The two strangers, one a fifth order and the other a fourth order, were minor threats to him. The pair near Lu Yi's position sprang into action. One of them, a burly and tall mountain of a man whose girth suggested that he could be a body-tempering cultivator, began to race to the aid of his comrades. The other one, presumably a spell cultivator, began channeling his spiritual power. The body-tempering cultivator had barely reached far enough when he was greeted by an astonishing sight. A barrage of more than a dozen sword-like shafts of searing white incandescence had rained down on his comrades and had failed to kill them, but more were homing in on them. Li Baxin had gone easy on the first exchange. After all, he needed to ascertain if the four strangers could be Grand Sky Coalition allies. But once he made sure, he unleashed more, and he was still far from reaching his limit. Li Baxin could already conjure and control up to 100 shafts of light back when he was still in the Spirit Creek realm. Reaching the fourth order of the Cloud River realm meant that his bar had risen. Sword cultivators have always been known for their aptitude in killing, and unless his opponents were at least 2 ranks beyond his, few could possibly withstand Li Baxin's wrath. The radiance of the multitudinous bolts of light illuminated the dimness of the jungle as they ripped through the 2 enemy cultivators' protective aura, perforating them like a sieve with blood streaming out of every wound they rendered. The gaps between ranks within the Cloud River realm were as huge as a canyon. Both enemy cultivators were at least fully fledged 4th and 5th orders, but all that meant nothing in the face of Li Baxin's skill and experience. In just one exchange, 1 4th order and 1 5th order were nearly dead. In fact, Li Baxin would have been able to slay them all outright if not for the fact that he was intentionally keeping them alive, or half dead, for Lu Yi. The body-tempering cultivator who was on his way towards his comrades could feel his blood curdling the moment the sight of them crashing to the ground and the grinning boy mask panning towards him hit him. Deep down inside, he grappled with panic at facing off against such a formidable opponent. His legs stopped moving, not realizing that he had just involuntarily become a sitting duck. A thunderbolt came out of nowhere, whipping him and nearly knocking him to the ground. He jerked his head sideways and there was a female to his flank not far away, wearing the mask of a tearful girl. Obviously the pair of the man in the grinning boy mask just now. There's more than one ambush here, he realized. The body-tempering cultivator was panicking. Behind him, his spell cultivator colleague howled, "Run!" The spell cultivator had only just finished channeling his power and was ready to charge when he saw first his two colleagues being cut down like a tornado tearing through a town before seeing the body-tempering cultivator being pummeled by another spell. That was enough reason for him to turn tail and flee. Hurling his spell straight at Feng Yuechan, he channeled another surge of spiritual power and took into the air to escape. But he did not manage to fly high enough. His feet were barely 1 foot over the ground when a massive force crashed into him from above before he felt the bite of steel gnawing through his flesh and bone. The fiery red glimmer of the steel blasted apart the protective aura that bristled the surface of the spell cultivator's skin, slicing through his sinews and crunching through his bones down the length of his back. He crashed to the ground a lifeless cadaver. He did not notice that there was someone waiting to strike from behind. Chapter 513 Having a Go at Me? Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan's ambush had taken up all of the enemy cultivator's attention, and the enemy spell cultivator did not notice another opponent behind him. By the time Lu Yi had delivered his blow, it was too late. He instantly crashed to the ground after barely taking flight. The impact left him breathless and dizzy for a second before he saw the glint of steel descending down on him. Frantically, the spell cultivator channeled his spiritual power and summoned his protective aura only to watch it shatter 3 seconds after it materialized by the blow falling on his head. The air was rent with the sound of steel as the spell cultivator bore the brunt of the blows falling in interweaving flurries. The loud impacts echoed as the spell cultivator's entire form trembled and convulsed under the weight of the onslaught. The protective aura's integrity ultimately crumbled under the relentless assault, leaving him exposed and open to the next barrage of steel that easily ripped him apart, body and soul. With his vision and life slowly ebbing away, the spell cultivator collapsed. Lu Yi raced to rejoin the others. Feng Yuechan had not stopped firing spell after spell at the body-tempering cultivator to keep him busy while Li Baxian's profuse shafts of light soared around like a tempest, preventing the incapacitated enemy cultivators from being rescued. With a wave of his hand, the shafts of light withdrew the moment he saw Lu Yi speedily approaching, and he directed them at the enemy body-tempering cultivator. The pair of heavily wounded cultivators had not even exhaled with relief when Lu Yi was already upon them. All it took was a couple of swishes and the two men crumpled to the floor, as dead as a pair of doornails. Lu Yi would not have been able to dispatch them both with such ease if it were under normal circumstances. Both a 4th and 5th order could easily give him a hard time. It was Li Baxian's successful ambush that had incapacitated them badly enough for anyone or even an ordinary 3rd order to deliver the final coup de grace. With the two finally dealt with, Lu Yi rejoined the others in dealing with the final enemy remaining, the body-tempering cultivator. Mere seconds had passed since Feng Yuechan engaged the body-tempering cultivator, and the addition of Li Baxian into the fray had left the enemy cultivator littered with wounds all over him. The burly enemy failed to keep up with the intensity and speed of the swarming shafts of light, and Feng Yuechan's spells were not making things easier. One after another, the spells hammered into him like a battering ram that the shield spirit artifact that he was using had long been knocked out of his grasp. But with Lu Yi joining in, his fate was as sealed as a fully nailed coffin. Seconds later, the giant body-tempering cultivator of a man crashed to the ground. Lu Yi bolted after the speck of white light still bobbing in midair and thrust his hand into it. He felt his fingers closing in on something solid and seized it, then he raced around to collect the ward flags that he had placed around the site of the battle without even a look at what he had retrieved from the white light of the endowment. In the meantime, Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan cleared up the dead bodies and stripped them of anything useful. "Let's go," Lu Yi called everyone. All 3 of them hurried back to the cave. To remain safe would mean that they should not dawdle at the site of the battle. The skirmish might have been a short one, but the commotion it caused could have attracted the attention of anyone, or any enemies, nearby. Fighting and moving like that might be a big hassle, but it was the safer way. A quarter of an hour later, everyone was back inside the cave, seated on the ground. "I've taken a look at the carnage roster, brother. The increase of carnage points on the first name is the same as what you should be getting after those kills. I guess that means that it really is you," said Li Baxian. That was true. Lu Yi had taken a quick peek at the carnage roster himself on the way back here. The 4 enemies that he had slain, 3 5th orders and 1 4th order, should garner him 430 carnage points. Since the number tallied with the gain of carnage points on the leading Lu Yi name at the first place of the roster, that would mean that it really was him. That was a very rewarding attempt. Most high-tier cultivators, including the second-place Xiao Yang, could only rake in 500 carnage points on average every day. Yet in one skirmish alone, Lu Yi had gotten more than 400 points. An amount that almost caught up to what Xiaoliang could earn in one day. Xiaoliang's carnage points total was so close to catching up with Lu Yi at first. One could almost guess how Xiaoliang would react when he saw himself being further down in the list again. Never before in the history of the Carnage Colosseum since its inception where a third order, not even anyone below the seventh order, managed to stay so comfortably at the first place of the Carnage roster. The usual contenders that led at the first three spots of the Carnage rosters were usually 8th, if not 9th orders. In fact, most of the time the top 3 spots were usually occupied by 9th orders. While there have been champions who had tried using the handicap to have a low-tier cultivator rake in as many kills as possible to win more points, to really pull off such a trick was easier said than done. To capitalize on the advantage offered by the handicap, certain conditions had to be met, the foremost being that the cultivator concerned must not exceed the 5th order, as the increments gained beyond this point would be too low to warrant any significant benefit. To say nothing of the unexpected incidents that could be potentially disastrous, even with a 5th order piggybacking a 9th order. Most 9th orders got into fights involving at least one or more 9th orders from the opposing faction. That would mean that the 9th order would not be able to properly provide enough protection for his or her weaker partner, especially during a very fierce battle. If anything were to happen to the weaker partner, the carnage points that had been accumulated would be lost, making the whole endeavor a fool's errand. If not for Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan's arrival, plus that unique gold amulet event the reward of which had propelled him to the top of the Carnage roster and provided him with a sound basis for this adventurous undertaking, Lu Yi would not have conceived the idea of wanting to contest for the first prize. He would rather hide somewhere safe and wait until the Colosseum ended. Everyone laid the booty they had collected on the ground before Lu Yi so that he could undo the magical seal of the storage bags. Undoing the seals had now become as easy as drawing inviolable from its sheath. It took just a few moments for him to finish opening all of the storage bags which he divided into 3 portions. 2 of these portions he handed to Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan. Next he emptied the bags of their contents. This time there wasn't anything valuable. It was time he had a look at whatever it was he got from the endowment speck of light. He had grabbed it and stuffed it into his storage sphere in his haste to vacate the site of the battle earlier. But when he took it out, to his surprise it was a flower. A magical flower. The last time he got something from an endowment like this, it yielded a white amulet. But his guess was spot on. The endowments that scattered all over the Colosseum really did come in various types, shapes, and sizes. Lu Yi knew little about medicine and herbs, hence he could not tell what kind of magical flower it was or what its properties and medicinal functions were. Right now, he could only surmise that it wasn't anything rare or precious. But whatever it was, it could wait until he had the chance to meet Shui Yuan and hand it to her. It was to Lu Ye's favor that the wait wasn't too long and the battle ended quickly. Lu Yi and his companions were not yet spent, but they decided to wait out inside the cave for another couple of hours to make sure that the earlier battle had not attracted the focus of anyone dangerous. When the wait was finally up, they stepped out of the cave. They headed for more than a dozen miles in another direction until they found a spot where Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan split off again like the last time to allow Lu Yi to begin setting up his magical ward. Once the trap was ready, they waited to spring their trap. Last time, success only came because of the sudden appearance of that endowment. It attracted a bunch of 1,000 Demon Ridge cultivators that ultimately became their prey. But this time they waited for more than a day and a night. Many cultivators had passed by their hiding spot, but every one of them was at least 7th orders and above, which Lu Yi and his companions would rather give a wide berth. It was almost evening when they finally saw a group of 3 passing by. Li Baxin revealed himself first to draw their attention. But when he attacked, he realized that his battlefield imprint did not have any reaction at all. He immediately withdrew his attack, much to the panic and surprise of all 3 strangers, although they quickly realized that this was just a big misunderstanding. They were allied cultivators from Grand Sky Coalition. Now that their affiliations have been made clear, there was no reason to involve any hostilities. Li Baxin had a quick talk with them to explain everything and the 3 scurried away at once. Hence the wait went on. There was no telling if any more prey would wander this way, and if there were, they could be members of the Grand Sky Coalition, which was a question where the answer would be revealed only during an attack on the prey. Nevertheless, both Li Baxin and Lu Yi did not grow weary or restless at all. They understood very well that right now, here in the large expanse of the Colosseum, their cultivation remained their single most glaring weakness. 3rd and 4th orders were the flesh that the strong feasted on. Hence, to make sure that their safety was ensured, patience and fortitude were crucial elements to their plan. Hours passed before another group of 3 passed by. Li Baxin spearheaded the ambush again, and this time, his battlefield imprint throbbed. It glowed bright and blue whilst the imprints of the 3 blazed with a fiery red luminescence. The marauders reaped success. Li Baxin badly injured one while wounding the remaining 2 in the first contact, and by the time Feng Yuechan joined in the fight, the victory was sealed. This also proved Lu Ye's earlier hypothesis that most low-tier cultivators traveled in groups. Those of the 7th order and beyond usually operated alone. The 3,000 Demon Ridge cultivators were all 5th orders, and the combined element of surprise by both Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan easily trampled whatever defense they attempted in their moment of desperation. All Lu Yi had to do during the gritting battle was maintain his cover and stealthily join in. At the end of the battle, all that was left were 3 dead bodies reeking of blood and success, which had translated to a 360 carnage points increment. Somewhere far away, Xiao Yang lifted his head to look at the carnage roster, and what he saw struck such disbelief into him that the corners of his eyes throbbed. Is that Lu Yi having a go at me? He had been feeling that way since Lu Yi had raked in 1,000 carnage points and dethroned him from the first spot. He had been roaming far and wide lately, looking for any Grand Sky Coalition cultivators he could sink his blade into to garner more carnage points. Every day he had been rushing to catch up to Lu Yi, but just when he thought he was going to overtake Lu Yi, the latter would suddenly gain several hundred carnage points, casting him further behind once again. Just when the gap between their carnage points was only 100 or so, it turned into 400 plus again. Damn you! Xiao Yang cursed quietly. But that was not all. As if he was not annoyed and frustrated enough, there was one more problem on his plate. A Grand Sky Coalition 9th Order had been hunting and harassing him. The unknown 9th Order wasn't high up on the carnage roster. He was somewhere in the teens. Lacking enough luck, his chance of getting within the top 3 places was steadily slipping out of sight. Therefore, this unknown 9th Order had abandoned his earlier vocation and had somehow devoted himself to harassing and sabotaging Xiao Yang, all the while keeping himself unseen as he kept closely behind the raving bladesmen champion. Xiao Yang would have easily defeated the 9th Order if it were open combat. But this mysterious 9th Order was smart enough to employ guerrilla tactics that even he could barely find a way around, and that annoyed him immensely. Chapter 514 Trap Ward. Days went by with the trio of Lu Yi, Li Baxin, and Feng Yuechan complying strictly with the tactic of shifting to another location after a successful bushwhacking, reaping rewards almost every day from at least 300 to 500 carnage points each time. The accumulation of points this way showed how well the plan was working. There weren't many changes to the rankings on the carnage roster, but one second-place Xiao Yang seemed to be beleaguered by some manner of difficulty that his gain in carnage points had slowed to the point where he was almost out of the top 10 names on the roster. At the moment, the new claimant to the second place on the roster was someone known as Tan Sheng. Lu Yi recognized the name. He could recall seeing this name back when the carnage roster first appeared, easily making him a possible 9th Order too. As far as he could remember, Tan Sheng hailed from a Tier 2000 Demon Ridge Order. As a cultivator wielding considerable strength and influence, he was a former top 10 on the Spirit Creek battlefield's Roll of Supremacy. Most of the champions now lording over the Cloud River battlefield were once elites of the Spirit Creek battlefield's Roll of Supremacy at one point. In his many years of being in the Spirit Creek realm, Li Baxin had watched with his own eyes generations of cultivators coming and going. Many he knew and some he had even fought against before. Even amongst the current crop of Cloud River realm elites, there were few who had not had the chance to meet him before, standing either side by side or against him in battle some time ago. This has become some form of advantage for Li Baxin, who could still be retaining vast connections everywhere. The raids on any unsuspecting cultivators unlucky enough to have stepped into their trap have been effortless lately, with Li Baxin's prowess and deadliness which usually resolved the outcome in the first exchange of blows alone. Added with Feng Yuechan, the battle would usually have been decided by the time Lu Yi sprung out to mop up the rest of the resistance. But there was one notable skirmish that had been rather difficult. A 6th Order was embedded as part of the group they waylaid, and it took a concerted effort from all 3 of them to finally put him down after Lu Yi was done with the rest of the 6th Order's squad. All 3 of them, Li Baxin, Feng Yuechan, and Lu Yi, were once former number 1s of the Roll of Supremacy when they were still in the Spirit Creek realm. Each of them wielded the ability to defeat opponents beyond their ranks, and so long as their opponent did not boast of any remarkable talents, experience, or even skill, there were few targets that their combined strength could not conquer. Another successful raid had just ended when Lu Yi looked up. The carnage points tally following his name registered 3,740. That was 1,000 carnage points ahead of second place Tan Sheng, who was still eating the dust of Lu Ye's unstoppable lead. Tan Sheng's chances of catching up were feeling more like a mirage in the desert by the minute. Next second he caught sight of a bolt of light streaking this way. In the blink of an eye, it reached their position and the light made a sharp swerve and landed right in front of them. Lu Ye's eyes contracted with shock. Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan tensed up warily, expecting the worst. The battlefield imprints on their hands flickered with a bright blue illumination. On the stranger's hand, they spied the scarlet-red glow blazing conspicuously. The huge pressure of facing off against a formidable enemy petrified them all as if they had been hit by an electric jolt. For Lu Yi recognized who it was. It was the same enemy he saw Xia Chanchan fighting back then. He did not know his name then and he still didn't know his name now. But he did know that this enemy was a ninth order. Far too many times they had tempted fate and finally, woe had descended upon them, both suddenly and jarringly. Clearly the commotion from the last fight had drawn him here. Standing side by side, Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan quietly channeled their power in preparation to strike. A similarly grim-faced Lu Yi too barely moved an inch. None of them would dare to break the stillness so long as Wei Kei remained motionless. Wei Kei panned his gaze around. He surveyed Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan, then he returned his gaze to Lu Yi. All he saw were three different masks staring back at him. But amber perched on Lu Ye's shoulder was all the proof he needed. Cracking a grin, he exclaimed, "Ah, found you at last." He was absolutely elated. 4 days he had been hunting for Lu Yi to no avail and fate had finally decided to reward his determination and resolve by putting Lu Yi right before him. Imagine ranging across lands hundreds of thousands of miles in length and combing through so many cultivators, all for one particular individual. From the carnage roster, he had deduced that Lu Yi had not been idle at all. The daily gain of several hundred carnage points had been proof enough. In the meantime he too had been busy. As a ninth order who preferred operating alone like the rest of his ilk, he had roamed everywhere, found his fair share of endowment rewards, and participated in several token of providence events, all of which have been tremendously fruitful even though he had not devoted himself to earning carnage points. His name was somewhere in the late teens at present. One might as well argue that Wei Kei had little ambition in competing for a good place on the carnage roster. Hunting down Lu Yi and slaying him had been his prime purpose. Though the rewards of winning the top spot on the carnage roster were undeniably enticing, they barely came close to beating the combined bounty offered by all Thousand Demon Ridge sects and orders for Lu Ye's head. The amount of supplies that he would receive for Lu Ye's head was just too good. So good that he wondered that it might even outlast his entire lifetime. Hence, since the beginning his target had always been Lu Yi. He was just passing by in the vicinity when the violent emission of spiritual power signatures from the battle caught his attention. Little did he expect that his curious move of coming over to have a look would result in him stumbling upon the very person he had been combing the Colosseum for. The face mask was different, but amber plus inviolable now still in Lu Ye's grasp, were all the signs Wei Kei needed to confirm Lu Ye's identity. As soon as he finished speaking, Wei Kei immediately fired a spell. It was a spell fired casually by the Thousand Demon Ridge Ninth Order. But even an arbitrary attack like that was deadly enough for Lu Yi. Before it even took form, it screamed through the air, and by the time it materialized as a full-fledged projectile of spiritual power, it was mere feet away from Lu Yi. The latter frantically mustered his power and the luminescent shield of glyph protection came into shape before him. The air wailed. Several shafts of light slammed in rapid succession into the spell's projectile, trying to whittle down its force. Li Baxin had realized that the attack was not one that Lu Yi would be able to take, hence he chose to protect Lu Yi instead of attacking Wei Quebec. But he was not the only one, even Feng Yuechan helped as well. Nevertheless, their combined efforts had not been able to fully defeat the spell in its entirety. With a bang, the eruption of force when the bolt hit and shattered the glyph protection shield, knocking Lu Yi into the air and he crashed to the ground. Wei Kei snorted coldly as he waved his hand at the directions of Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan. Luminescent lines appeared in mid-air, joining and intersecting quickly to form a huge round disc pulsing with rich spiritual power. The disc released invisible blades of wind howling through the air and slashed straight at Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan. He had intentionally dialed down the strength of his attack on Lu Yi. The last thing he needed was a fully unrecognizable corpse. Lu Ye's head needed to be intact for him to claim his bounty. As for Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan, there was no need to hold back at all. The many shafts of light surged in torrents back to Li Baxin, forming a wide wall of swords in front of him, while Feng Yuechan worked her magic and mists rose, coagulating into a gigantic golem towering 10 meters over her. But the wind blades easily blasted through the cloud giant and it burst into a shapeless mass of dissipating mists while Li Baxin's wall of swords shattered into splinters after just a split second of resistance. Right before they were in any danger, Feng Yuechan conjured her umbrella-shaped spirit artifact. The object radiated a burst of spiritual power the moment it opened, forming an energy shield that managed to withstand the deadly onslaught that slammed in successive barrages on the shield. A spell artifact? Wei Kai gasped, recognizing the magical umbrella for what it was. At the same time he started to wonder about Feng Yuechan's identity. A Cloud River Realm cultivator armed with a spell artifact must make her a very special individual. Deep inside he was doubled over with glee. He could thank the stars for not only finding Lu Yi but also two prey who would ensure a future of plenty and abundance. First and foremost Lu Yi. Ignoring Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan, Wei Kai lunged forward, homing in on his main prize Lu Yi. As a spell cultivator, he should be maintaining his distance from his opponents. Yet he was confident, being 6 ranks above Lu Yi, and he wanted to prevent causing too much damage and blowing Lu Yi to pieces. Hence he decided to stay close and do whatever he could to incapacitate Lu Yi. Yet his advance did not even reach 50 meters when Lu Yi leaped into the air. Wei Kai spied the ward flag in his grasp, something Lu Yi was not holding earlier, and Lu Yi began waving it furiously. A deafening hum rang like a bell's toll and sheets of light rose up instantaneously around him, forming a dome more than dozens of meters wide. Wei Kai did not see this coming at all, and there he was, trapped inside the dome of light. A magical ward. Wei Kai muttered a curse under his breath. He did not expect a magical ward, least of all a trap ward. No. I cannot let Lu Yi escape. His hand shot up and he fired an aureate bolt of light straight at where Lu Yi. Only Lu Yi was long gone. He had escaped from the ward's area the moment he activated it, exiting unimpeded with his ward flag while the golden energy bolt smacked harmlessly into the wall of light that came up just in time and leaving an inconsequential ripple sweeping across its surface. This trap ward looked very similar to a defensive ward, although they were essentially different. Cultivators inside a defensive ward were safe from attacks from the outside. But unlike defensive wards, trap wards prevented damage from the inside reaching the outside, effectively keeping any cultivators caught inside fully confined so long as the ward still existed. All in all, defensive wards were to prevent external attacks while trap wards were to prevent attacks from within. Few would have been able to tell the difference at first glance despite their stark contrast. To escape a trap ward, one had to destroy the ward. And as the caster of the ward, Lu Yi with the ward flag with him, could move in and out of the ward freely. This was the root of the confidence that compelled him to compete for the first spot on the Carnage roster despite being a third order. With the assistance of Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan, Lu Yi had nothing to be afraid of when dealing with other Cloud River Realm cultivators of mediocre strength and power. Even when they were faced with enemies too dangerous and formidable, they could rely on trap wards to buy them enough time to escape. Time which would ensure a safe flight away from the scene of battle. By the time the trap ward was revealed, Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan had already taken to the sky and sped away as fast as they could. Lu Yi might have had a later start, but with glyphs, wings and windwalk both activated, he demonstrated speed that outstripped even Li Baxin and caught up to them soon enough. Inside the trap ward, Wei Kai could only watch Lu Yi fleeing with frustration and resentment. He was so close to killing Lu Yi and achieving a life of wealth and prosperity. With his spiritual power mustered, he fired spell after spell at the glowing walls of light around him, eliciting an endless symphony of ripples that spread across the trap ward's dome-like shield as its brightness gradually waned. But the thunderous emission of spiritual power from the relentless slew of spells only served to remind Lu Yi and his companions to hasten. The trap ward might have worked nicely, but they were well aware that it would only hold for a short period of time. The exact duration would depend on what Wei Kai could do to defeat the ward and free himself. Chapter 515, A String of Unfortunate Events. Huge energy blasts never stopped hammering at the luminescent walls of the trap ward. Waves and waves of spiritual power emission surged from inside and the brightness of the walls was growing dimmer at speeds that the naked eye could see. Lu Yi had employed 8 ward keystones and several more flags for this trap ward, but it was just a hastily constructed magical ward that was subsistent on spirit stones, making it mediocre at best. The strength of a magical ward had everything to do with both the amounts of spiritual power stored in the ward and the richness of ambient spiritual qi in the atmosphere. The more spiritual power was used in the ward and the richer the ambient spiritual qi in the air around it was, the stronger and more potent the magical ward would be. That would make newly constructed wards weakest because they had not yet been able to draw enough spiritual qi from the atmosphere, with or without the addition of spirit stones. With time, a magical ward would store enough spiritual power to allow its potency to grow to its peak. The biggest advantage of this particular trap ward that Lu Yi had constructed was its smaller range of barely 60 meters. That had helped to enhance its strength. Nevertheless, it would take more than that to fully thwart a Cloud River Realm Ninth Order like Wei Quebec. In less than 20 seconds, the glow of the dome of the trap ward turned fully dark before it finally shattered. Liberated from his temporary confinement, Wei Kei took to the sky and began streaking towards where Lu Yi and the others had vanished. He could not allow this chance to slip past his fingers. It was only luck that he had managed to stumble into Lu Yi, and this chance could never come by again. But as far as Wei Kei was concerned, he was confident. The bunch of third and fourth orders might have fled, but even a 20-second head start wouldn't prevent him from catching up. He gazed into the distance and spied a few sparkles of light in the distance, recognizing his fleeing quarry. Channeling his power, Wei Kei turned into a streaking shooting star himself to give chase. At the same time, Lu Yi jerked his head around. He had felt a dangerous presence incoming, and seeing a speck of light in the distance coming their way, he knew that Wei Kei had managed to free himself from the trap ward. But it was as he had expected. The trap ward that he had constructed could only delay a ninth order for 20 seconds at most. Nevertheless, that was all the time he needed. All three of them ignored the imminent threat and focused on gaining as much speed as possible, flying quickly and covering more than a dozen miles before they finally arrived at their destination. They landed just outside the cave and dashed inside, making for its innermost caverns, where they stood together in the teleportation ward and activated it. The lines of the magical ward shone with a sudden radiance, a magical glow that traced every single line of the ward while illuminating the rock chamber. Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan could only watch with awe and surprise. They had used the divine opportunity column to travel, but never anything like this, hence the fresh and new experience. The well-seasoned amber lifted both its paws and wrapped them around Lu Ye's neck, its citron eyes palpitating with anticipation. As the teleportation ward began operating, Lu Yi ripped Inviolable out of its sheath, sending a glowing side that darted towards the spot where the explosive wards were. A deafening bang rocked the entire cave amid an eruption of searing flames and blinding brilliance that caused rocks and debris to crash down from the ceiling. By the time the tumult died down, the place had turned into utter chaos. Wei Kei arrived 10 seconds later, rushing into the cave hurriedly. But Lu Yi and the others were long gone. All he could find were broken rocks strewn everywhere. Where the hell are they? Wei Kei gasped to himself, his face fraught with consternation. He was positively certain that Lu Yi and his companions had landed here just now. He had seen them entering this cave when he was still in the air before a thunderous explosion ensued. Yet when he came in here, all of them had vanished. Finding that unbelievable, he searched the place, going even to the deepest most recesses of the cave system and ultimately finding a dead end. Still, he could not find the slightest hints of his quarry's whereabouts. 1 minute ago they were all here, and yet they were all gone. Wei Kei hastily left the cave. He peered around for a few seconds before he determined a bearing and soared into the air in that direction, still unable to come to terms with Lu Yi and his companions' disappearing act. They must be somewhere nearby, he thought, and I must find them. Meanwhile, inside another subterranean cavern more than 100 meters underground 200 miles away, the unseen lines of the teleportation ward traced on the ground came alive with a sudden dazzling and intense incandescence. The air around the ward warped and 3 figures materialized almost miraculously. The moment their feet hit solid ground, Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan staggered so unsteadily that they nearly fell, their faces sickly pale and aghast. None of them were hurt during the encounter with Wei Quebec. But it was the terrifying sensation of having nothing under their feet during the magical conveyance here that had them both feeling as if they had been thrust down a bottomless abyss. It felt so real and vivid. But more importantly, neither of them knew if they should be channeling their spiritual power with fear that it might disrupt the conveyance process, despite how being unready greatly unsettled them. Especially when what seemed like a split-second process felt more like an eternal and precipitous descent into a bottomless pit to them. Now they understood why Amber clutched onto Lu Yi as soon as the conveyance process began. It must have learned from the many times it traveled all around the Colosseum with Lu Yi. But before they could fully recover from the ordeal of the process, the bluish glow from the back of their hands illuminated the jagged and rough surface of the cave floor. Still within the circle of the teleportation ward, all three of them tensed warily. That their battlefield imprints were reacting in unison would mean that they were not alone, and whoever was nearby, he or she must be a cultivator of the Thousand Demon Ridge. With their innate and remarkable senses, they noticed there really was someone nearby. Just a little more than 50 meters away, Bing was sitting alone on the ground, recuperating quietly. He came to this cave just 4 hours ago, and after making sure that this place was empty, he had decided to stop and rest there. He had no companion, and as with all other Seventh Orders, he was at an impasse. Being alone basically precluded him from being able to compete for a good position on the Carnage roster. Getting on the roster was doable, but he didn't expect that he would be high enough to win anything worth the trouble. Therefore, he chose to focus his efforts on the Token of Providence events as well as all other endowments that appeared all over the Colosseum. At times, he would be lucky enough to stumble upon weaker Grand Sky Coalition cultivators whom he could kill and get a good haul from the loot. At times, when fate wished to test him, he would be faced with opponents he could barely defeat. Nevertheless, as Seventh Orders, escaping unscathed from enemy 8th and 9th Orders remained possible. Bing would not have chosen to operate alone if he was not confident enough in his abilities and strength. He was just having a moment of solitude in the peacefulness of the cave when the darkness within was broken. It was a magical ward, and before he could comprehend what was going on, 3 figures appeared within it. Bing's eyes went wide. What the hell? How did these 3 people just come out of nowhere like that? But he quickly collected himself and his brow cocked with interest. He had understood something. These 3 people must have used some sort of teleportation ward. That must be what the glowing lines that appeared were. But a Cloud River Realm cultivator skilled enough to construct something as complex as a teleportation ward? Interesting. Bing gradually rose to his feet. It was Lu Yi who saw Bing first, and he cursed quietly to himself. The enemy was alone, and the timing could not have been any worse for them to encounter a lone wolf right here and now. There was no telling what rank the stranger was, but he must be at least a 7th Order. He could still remember the last time he was surprised by the presence of a Thousand Demon Ridge enemy during his escape using a teleportation ward, and he certainly did not expect it to happen again so soon. But as much as he was surprised, it wasn't incomprehensible. If he had found this cave, then anyone could find it too. From his initial posture, the stranger looked like he was just here for a rest, although there was no telling how long he had been here. Lu Yi was lucky last time that his opponent wasn't too powerful, and with Yi's help, he had defeated him and survived. But whether or not he would repeat that feat again today remained to be seen. He could only hope that the enemy was not an 8th, or even a 9th Order, or they would be dead meat. Hence, the same moment Bing rose to his feet, Lu Yi wildly willed his teleportation ward to activate once more to send them elsewhere. Each and every teleportation ward that he had constructed was linked to at least 2 other wards. The one that they had used to come here was obviously destroyed to prevent Wei Kei from divining their whereabouts, but there should at least be one more that he could use to escape to. But the next second he felt his heart skip a beat. He could not pick up any signs of another teleportation ward connected to this one. What a string of unfortunate events. Not only had they stumbled into an enemy that was likely a 7th Order at least, but the teleportation ward could no longer be used. That he could not sense its link to the rest of its counterparts could only mean that the others had been destroyed. There was no way out. His luck had been so good. But all of a sudden, it had taken a plunge. For starters, it was unpredictable what would happen if they were to fight here. Engaging in a battle could result in the entire rock chamber caving in and collapsing on them regardless of the outcome. All 4 of them could be buried alive here. Lu Yi lifted a hand to stroke Amber. Li Baxin stood in front of Lu Yi, shielding him. This place doesn't seem suitable for a fight, my friend. It's cramped and it's in danger of crashing down. What do you think? He called. Behind his mask, Li Baxin was grimacing grimly at their fate. They had just jumped out of the frying pan and into the fire. He did not know what went wrong with the teleportation ward, but he was right. This really wasn't the ideal place to start a fight. Furthermore, he had the same suspicion as Lu Yi. If the enemy was alone, that would mean that he must be a formidable opponent with might that not even the collective strength of all 3 of them might prevail against. If they could pacify and calm the enemy down, they might be able to walk away from this unscathed. Bing seized his spear and thrust it down on the ground to intimidate everyone, exuding an aura of power and force. Do you think you mice are a threat to me? He grinned. His spiritual power churned. Yi Bing really was a seventh order. Lu Yi and his companions exhaled with relief. They were eased by the notion that the enemy was a seventh order. At the very least, the situation wasn't as dismal as they dreaded. If Yi Bing was an eighth, or even a ninth order, then a victory might only be possible at the cost of their own lives. Nevertheless, that did not make this an easy battle at all. Lu Yi and his group had jointly defeated a sixth order before, but fighting a seventh order was different. None of them had any confidence at all. More importantly, Wei Kei must still be hunting for them. A ninth order could easily cover the distance of 200 miles. So if a fight were to break out now, the commotion could easily attract Wei Kei's or anyone else's attention if they were nearby, assuming the cave managed to withstand the abuse of a fight here. Impudence. Lu Yi and his companions maintained their silence, but this only served to embolden Yi Bing. Sneaky scoundrels, he snorted, show yourselves. Remove those masks this instant. Chapter 5:16, A Sense of Exhilaration. Many within the Cloud River battlefield chose to keep their faces masked to hide their identities. As ubiquitous as they were practical, masks in all the varying designs and cost were helpful in concealing identities, allowing many, especially in circumstances where transparency was unwise, to transform into faceless silhouettes that blended and vanished amongst the crowd to preserve their anonymity. Strangely, Yi Bing held a unique disdain and disgust for such trappings, and with the power he wielded, he was trying to impose his will on Lu Yi and the others. I'll count to 3, he commanded, his tone ice-cold. Remove your masks. He would have charged forward without a word if not for the geographical disadvantage the moment he realized that the newcomers were enemies. That the newcomers had arrived in a group was all he needed to know that they must be weaker than he was. He had defeated many such enemies before despite the numerical disadvantage, and few had managed to put up what could be worthy of a fair battle. 1. 2. Li Baxin reached to remove his mask, resignation etched on his concealed face as he sighed helplessly. He was such an indomitable presence in the Spirit Creek battlefield, and there was hardly anyone who did not fear the name Li Baxin of the devoted ones. Still, here he was, as weak as any novice could be in this new world. Like lightning flashing across a calm sky, Lu Yi burst forward from behind Li Baxin, his gleaming blade sending an arc of light hurtling toward Yi Bing. Impudence. Yi Bing boomed, indignant at their defiance. He lifted his spear to retaliate, the weapon effortlessly shattering the incandescent scythe of light. Rage came in waves. Even despite the odds, these puny voles dared to attack him first when he had not. His cold eyes took in the audacious challenger, a mere third order, judging by the glow emanating from him, who was already sprinting at him, and he cracked into a wicked grin. A third order, eh? Is this fool wishing for his own death? He mused. He could easily blast the challenger to death with just one blow. But a flutter of spiritual power from behind caused him to pause. Someone was behind him. His focus had been centered on Lu Yi the whole time, and it was too late. Something dark shrouded him, and by the time he regained his senses, he found himself lost in a completely different environment, ensnared in an unfamiliar rocky terrain. Yi Bing's visage twisted with confusion. He did not know what just happened and what had caused the cave to vanish, replaced by the eerie forest that now surrounded him. Back in the cave, Yi materialized, holding aloft the mystical Nine-Realm scroll with the drawings of a rocky sprawl etched upon its surface. Right in the center of the sprawl was the image of a solitary figure, unmistakably Yi Bing, still spinning around, completely confused. Being stuck here because of the failure of escaping using the teleportation ward in such a dangerous predicament with a formidable seventh order to contend with was not Lu Ye's nor his companion's idea of fun. Lu Yi knew fully well how dire and desperate the situation was, and so did the others. They understood that Yi Bing's delay in initiating combat was due to his inability to gauge their cultivation ranks at first. Had he perceived their relative weakness, he would have struck without a second thought. Thus they planned their course of action. When Li Baxin stepped forward to shield Lu Yi, the latter made a subtle gesture by tapping on the miniaturized Amber's head, a silent message communicated through years of shared trials and understanding with Yi. That was when Yi slipped away, reappearing behind Yi Bing like a wisp of smoke. With Lu Yi keeping Yi Bing distracted, Yi sprung her trap, unfurling the Nine-Realm scroll. A spirit treasure more potent than any spirit artifact weapon, its might increased as Yi's cultivation grew. That, plus the element of surprise, was what helped to ensnare the mighty Yi Bing within it. In spite of everything, this was an outcome they would have preferred. fighting in the cavern risked catastrophic collapse or even attracting the attention of other formidable entities like Wei Kei of the Thousand Demon Rich. The Nine-Realm Scroll could contain whatever damage sustained inside, limiting the risks as long as Yi could endure it. As soon as He Bing was ensnared, Lu Yi bolted forward towards Yi, followed closely by Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. They did not know what just happened, but their confused expressions soon morphed into determination as they decided to follow Lu Yi. Yi flapped the scroll and all three of them vanished, their forms now joining He Bing within the image of the rocky sprawl, appearing on the parchment surface. Deep in the spread of rocky terrain inside the Nine-Realm Scroll pocket dimension, He Bing watched as his opponents appeared one after another. He finally grasped his predicament, realizing where he was at last, the pocket dimension of a ward scroll. He had lived long enough, amassing sufficient skills, awareness and experiences, to learn about that from the sudden changes in the surroundings and how his opponents had reappeared. His eyes narrowed, acknowledging the fact that he faced not 3 but 4 adversaries. The fourth had been hiding in the shadows and was most likely the one wielding the ward scroll now. While fear gripped his heart, a thrill of anticipation also coursed through him. A ward scroll was a priceless artifact. In spite of their low rank in cultivation, He Bing was surprised that his opponents were in possession of such an extraordinary item. If he could defeat them, the ward scroll could be his. No longer hesitating, He Bing made his move, charging toward Lu Yi first and foremost. The decision was an easy one. Lu Yi had already exposed himself as a third order, for ranks well below He Bing. Brimming with confidence, He Bing believed that he could eliminate Lu Yi with a single strike. With great speed, he covered more than 10 meters in just 2 strides, reaching Lu Yi in the blink of an eye as he thrust his spear forward. Such a straightforward attack, but it gave Lu Yi an immense and panicky sense of crisis. His entire self tensed as Inviolable screamed out of its sheath with a ringing cry. Spiritual power surged down the length of its blade as Lu Yi slashed the weapon in an upward slash to meet the incoming spear tip. Lu Yi's eyes constricted the moment steel clashed. The blow came heavy and forceful, and for a split second, Lu Yi felt like his weapon had hit a solid rock boulder instead. The spear tip was barely deflected at all from its lethal trajectory. A precipice of life or death in one solitary exchange. Such was the force of an attack delivered by a 7th order, and it was clear that He Bing had yet to unleash his full might. The 4th and the 7th orders each represented 2 critical thresholds in the Spirit Creek realm. Cultivators who made it past these 2 orders would find themselves experiencing a significant escalation of one's strength, and the same principle applied within the Cloud River realm as well. Therefore, only cultivators beyond the 7th order realm possessed both the ability and audacity to venture into the Colosseum alone. Nevertheless, there were exceptions to this rule. There were also 6th orders who fancied their chances solo, such as the one Lu Yi and Yi had defeated together earlier. The luminescent shield of runes of glyph protection materialized in front of Lu Yi as he contorted himself backward as much as possible. The spear grazed past him, annihilating the glowing shield in its wake, while leaving a searing trail of pain across Lu Yi's neck as he nearly tumbled from the blow. And before Lu Yi could regain his footing, He Bing's spear, having failed to find its initial mark, descended like a crushing rod about to bash his skull. With a resounding thud, Lu Yi found himself slammed onto the ground with numbing waves of pain spreading from his shoulder blade down to his lower abdomen. A flicker of surprise sparked in He Bing's eyes. Evidently he was not expecting a 3rd order to survive that blow. Yet that was the extent of his surprise. With Lu Yi smashed into the ground, his spiritual power in complete disarray, and his movements momentarily paralyzed, he was a sitting duck. He Bing's spear was wheeling back for another powerful thrust that would have skewered Lu Yi like a boar when a sonorous whistle filled the air. Several menacing waves of death laced with murderous choler and aggression bore down upon him from behind. Sword Cultivator. He Bing swiftly discerned the nature of the assailant bearing down on him, acknowledging that while his 3 opponents were not on par with him in terms of cultivation, he knew better than to discount the deadliness that sword cultivators were so famous for. In a hurried response, He Bing whirled around to face his attackers, his gaze meeting a sky filled with luminescent flying shafts. He immediately rattled his long spear, setting off a symphony of blooming silhouettes shaped like the tip of his spear. The resounding clangor of metal on metal echoed through the surroundings as sparks erupted and danced. Every incoming shaft was deftly deflected, their onslaught momentarily held at bay. Amid the hail of radiantly glowing shafts, streaking spells spiraled around seamlessly, integrating with the flying bolts of light in a relentless and ceaseless assault. an unending tempest of deadly artistry. Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan had spent their formative years together, their bond forged from shared experiences of growth and cultivation. For the sake of Li Baxian, who had become her childhood sweetheart, Feng Yuechan was willing to linger in the Spirit Creek realm for over a decade, suffering a stagnation in her progress when she could have achieved more. This shared history manifested in a formidable partnership, flawless and impeccably coordinated. The gravity of the situation was not lost on He Bing as he noticed an unsettling detail. The sword and the spell cultivators were both a step above the combat cultivator in terms of rank, each evidently fourth orders. Yet, the depth of their mastery and skill seemed to exceed He Bing's own level. All three of them must be acolytes of renowned sects or orders, and their prowess clearly a hallmark of their status as elites. Strangely, this revelation, while daunting, stirred a sense of exhilaration within He Bing. His roots lay in a modest Tier 4 sect. Even though he had advanced into the Cloud River realm with all 360 spiritual points unlocked, He Bing was aware of his inferior standing in comparison to the true prodigies, those whose name had once been on the Spirit Creek battlefield's roll of supremacy while his own name had been notably absent. Yet right here, right now, he found himself securely in possession of the initiative in this fight against three formidable adversaries. If this were a fight where all of them were equals in cultivation ranks, he would not have stood a chance at all. Not even in single combat against any of these adversaries. So what if they came from prestigious backgrounds? So what if they possessed superior talents? Nothing could trump the sheer difference in their cultivation rank. Nevertheless, he could not shake off an uncanny familiarity that never stopped nagging at him. Some time before, or somewhere unknown, he felt as if he had seen the sword cultivator and the spell cultivator. While Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan held He Bing in a tight deadlock, Lu Yi quickly scrambled to his feet and extricated himself from the immediate vicinity. Wiping a hand across his scarlet-drenched neck, he felt the slickness and heat of his own blood on his hand. He recognized the close shave he had just had, the dangerous proximity of He Bing's lethal spear and the monumental risk of facing a seventh order all by himself as a third order. He would have been killed if he were any slower. Go! He Bing unleashed a guttural bark. Several streaks of light, the telltale glow that flying weapons emitted, burst to life abruptly. They sliced through the chaotic whirlwind of flying swords and spells and hurtled toward Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. Neither Li Baxian nor Feng Yuechan had the audacity to stand in direct opposition to such an onslaught. Feng Yuechan produced her umbrella-like spell artifact. Unfurling its protective expanse before them, they braced themselves for the incoming cascading impact. When the flying weapons hit, each of their powerful strikes against the luminescent shield of the umbrella-like spell artifact pummeled Feng Yuechan with one piecemeal step, eliciting protesting flares of brilliance from the umbrella. Surviving the barrage, they looked up to find He Bing successfully penetrating beyond the shafts of light, charging headlong into them. Li Baxian brandished his sword. The weapon trembled in his grip as if recalling the legion of glowing shafts that instantly regrouped around him, coalescing into a dragon-like monstrosity to counter He Bing. Both figures threw themselves into each other, but as soon as they met, the dragon burst into countless sparkling white cinders while Li Baxian careened away, crashing to the ground like a rag doll. Chapter 517 And Who Might You Be? He Bing persisted unwaveringly in the pursuit of his quarry with the doggedness of a shark on the scent of blood, his spear thrusting towards the descending figure of Li Baxian with the ferocity and deadliness of a pit viper, poised to kill and maim. Feng Yuechan's being brimmed with surging spiritual power. A dense mist manifested around her instantly, its appearance precipitously plummeting the ambient temperature. Unaware of the impending danger, He Bing recklessly charged headlong into the frigid atmosphere. The cold air congealed into ice, its crystalline tendrils spreading outward with the intent to encase He Bing in an icy prison. Had they been of equal cultivation levels, breaking free from this spell would have proven nigh impossible. Yet, He Bing's cultivation outstripped Feng Yuechan by at least 3 ranks. Sensing the looming threat, he shook his body, and with waves of surging spiritual power from him, the encasing ice crystals shattered into fragments. His gaze panned to the disheveled Feng Yuechan not far away. At his mental direction, his flying weapons screamed straight for her like a flock of vultures and swooped down with the force of a battering ram, slamming furiously into her umbrella-like spell artifact. The impact sent Feng Yuechan hurtling backward before crashing to the ground ignominiously. Enjoy playing the savior, huh? He Bing snarled, grinding his teeth as he darted forth, homing in on Feng Yuechan with a murderous collar. Enveloped in the dazzling illumination of his glowing shafts, Li Baxin bolted forward to intercept. Simultaneously, Lu Yi was launching an assault of his own on He Bing from behind with inviolable blazing crimson red along the length of its steel in what was a concerted pincer attack on the enemy. However, despite their seamless coordination, the colossal disparity between their cultivation ranks and He Bing's remained insurmountable. In no more than 3 exchanges of blows, both Lu Yi and Li Baxin were sent hurtling through the air with blood spurting forth from their wounds. Feng Yuechan's spell once again surged forth, preventing He Bing from delivering more damage to them. Back inside the underground cavern, Yi clutched the 9-realm scroll in her hands firmly, channeling her spiritual power into it with unwavering desperation, her anxious gaze fixated upon the dynamic interplay of the figures incessantly weaving back and forth amid the furious clash within the confines of the scroll's pocket dimension. Anxiety mounting to the point of panic, she could only sit on her own hands as she witnessed the intensity of the battle unfolding before her. Her current cultivation rank in the Cloud River realm was the highest she had ever accomplished. In theory, by being in control of the 9-realm scroll, she should have been able to provide some form of assistance to Lu Yi and the others. Nevertheless, the ferocity of the ongoing battle now being waged in the scroll's pocket dimension left her feeling powerless. The sheer force of the clash between 4 Cloud River realm cultivators set the scroll into violent tremors, compelling her to exert every ounce of her strength to maintain its operation. Any faltering in the supply of her spiritual power to keep the 9-realm scroll operating and He Bing would escape. To that end, she did not dare to act rashly, and that left her only with the option of maintaining her control of the 9-realm scroll while praying that her companions would triumph. Back inside the messy sprawl of rock columns and debris that was the scroll's pocket dimension, Lu Yi and Li Baxin were blitzing at He Bing again and again. Yet each time they were met with such formidable resistance from the 7th-order enemy that they were collecting more wounds than doling out them. Feng Yuechan was faring somewhat better, although she was not going easy just yet. Unleashing spells with hardly any signs of respite, she was fully aware that any sign of a letdown would spell the demise of Lu Yi and Li Baxin. Whether Lu Yi, Li Baxin, or even Feng Yuechan, none of them had ever experienced perils as deadly as this. Teetering on the edge of a precipice of death, all 3 of them were aware that one little mistake could lead to irreversible disaster. In the meantime, He Bing's earlier contemptuous expression slowly receded from his face. Whatever superiority he still wielded, the battle was hardly going the way he expected. What he initially anticipated as a one-sided slaughter since he ascertained the cultivation ranks of his adversaries had turned out to be a surprising performance of impeccable resistance. Looking at the overall situation, even if these 3 teamed up, they were no match for him. Although he was alone, he still had the upper hand due to his strong cultivation. However, in reality he had difficulty killing any of these 3. Whenever he thought that he was about to put down one of them for good, the other 2 would dive in with reckless abandon to thwart him. This was especially true of the sword cultivator, whose flying shafts of light had been a constant nuisance if not a threat to him. Several times he had toyed with the notion of going the extra mile of killing the sword cultivator and risking being heavily injured. But his reservations got the better of him and he could only go on allowing this debacle to go on. After all, being injured in the Colosseum would mean that he would have to sit out the rest of the duration to recuperate and heal. At any rate, the situation was increasingly favorable for him. Both the sword and the combat cultivators were getting weaker and slower from their worsening injuries. It would not be long before one of them crumbled to the ground for good, and he would have no trouble dealing with the remaining 2. If someone had told him before today that a few 3rd and 4th orders would put up such a good fight against him, he would have casually dismissed the notion with nothing but a disdainful scoff. Yet, right here, right now, the truth was right before his very eyes, proving him wrong. Unbelievable. All 3 adversaries must be of notable repute, particularly the sword and spell cultivator. The more he clashed with them, the more an uncanny sense of familiarity washed over him. Another intense exchange of blows saw Li Baxin and Lu Yi successively repulsed one after another. Even before he landed, the mask of a boy's face that Li Baxin wore cracked and shattered, revealing a gash on his forehead where blood began dribbling out. Had he not swiftly retreated, the injury would have been more than just a mere cut above his brows. His very skull might have been impaled by the tip of He Bing's spear. Plus, Lu Ye's saber had arced around just in time to parry the blow, and that allowed the opening for Li Baxin to evade. The pieces of the broken mask fell to the ground, exposing Li Baxin's stony countenance. He could see no glimmer of victory in sight given the circumstances, but that did not mean that he was going to give up just yet. With a sideswipe of his spear that blasted aside another one of Feng Yuechan's death bolts, He Bing cast his gaze upon Li Baxin's face. He was startled for 1 second before he exclaimed, visibly shocked and surprised, "You are Li Baxin." That was when he realized that the sense of familiarity that has been bugging him was not misplaced. Li Baxin of all people. As a former Spirit Creek Realm cultivator who once roamed the Spirit Creek battlefield, there was no way he wouldn't know the renown of Li Baxin, the Heavenate monstrosity who once dominated the upper echelons of the battlefield's role of supremacy that even those whose names were on the roll regarded him with terror. Even He Bing himself once watched Li Baxin from afar with admiration and envy. He was no stranger to the rumors about how Li Baxin's damage to his spiritual points was what prevented his ascension to becoming a Heaven 9 cultivator, but he did not know that Li Baxin had finally stepped into the Cloud River battlefield. That would explain why he had been fighting against an adversary of such profound skill and fundamentals. It was Li Baxin. That must mean that you're Feng Yuechan? He Bing turned his gaze to the side. Deducing the identity of Feng Yuechan, having confirmed Li Baxin's profile, posed no difficulty. Their inseparability was well known to all, along with the fact that she was a spell cultivator. He Bing directed his attention to Lu Yi at last. "And who might you be?" he asked. The pieces were beginning to fit into place. The renowned Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan, who after more than a decade of remaining in the Spirit Creek realm, would possess such impeccable skill and proficiency displayed in the skirmish earlier. But what about this stranger in the mask of a long-fanged demon? Despite being one rank lower than Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan in cultivation, his strength and skill were on par with theirs. But Lu Yi had hardly the inclination to respond to the question. Seizing the moment, he used the moment to gather his strength. He was drenched with blood from head to toe. While the wounds that scattered all over him were nowhere near grave yet, the sheer number of the wounds was enough to have crippled anyone else. Even the back of his hand that now gripped the hilt of his weapon was torn with fresh blood flowing down his hand and onto the steel of his saber. "No matter," an unperturbed He Bing responded when he received no answer. "Who would have thought that the renowned Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan would meet their demise at my hands?" He grinned broadly. How ironic is fate. Certain of his victory, He Bing advanced. He vanished in 1 second only to reappear just in front of Li Baxin in the next. Exuding an air of certainty regarding their defeat, he advanced and in an instant materialized before Li Baxin. His spear shot up with the speed and intensity of a lashing serpent, aiming straight for Li Baxin's head. The sword cultivator posed the greatest threat to him and thus had to be eliminated first. At the same time, Lu Yi and Feng Yuechan reacted swiftly. The former pounced upon him from behind, while the latter fired another spell. The legion of flying shafts surged after He Bing in a terrible deluge, yet even with their sheer number and might, He Bing's spear prevailed. With each swing of the long polearm, he swept aside the currents of flying shafts pouring at him before driving it up into Li Baxin's face. Li Baxin had not even the slightest intention to flinch. He held his sword straight, its tip aimed at his foe. Next, he vanished, swallowed by a sudden burst of radiance that turned into a shaft of light of its own that shot forward to charge at the enemy. The atmosphere instantly turned palpably thick with the radiation from both their blows, Li Baxin's fearless charge and He Bing's formidable thrust, as both figures brushed past each other in a split-second exchange of attacks. Li Baxin screeched to a halt more than a dozen meters away. He crumbled to one knee, his hand clutching his abdomen. Crimson blood oozed through his fingers. On the other hand, He Bing's cheek was a grotesque mess of mushy flesh and blood. The pain ignited furious anger within him. How could this have happened? A mere fourth order who could hurt him? He Bing dismissed Feng Yuechan's incoming death bolt with a smack of his spear, shattering it into oblivion. Next, he pivoted around and bolted after Li Baxin, his icy resolve to kill now set in stone. But one stride was all he managed before Lu Yi appeared from his flank with inviolable bearing down on him, its sharp edge glinting dangerously. "Get out of my sight!" He Bing snarled angrily, his spear rising to swat Lu Yi aside. Their steels clashed and it was then He Bing realized that something had changed. The third-order stranger had grown swifter and stronger all of a sudden. Several resounding clashes ensued and Lu Yi was finally flung backward. He landed beside Li Baxin, his right arm throbbing incessantly despite inviolable still in his grip. But He Bing appeared perplexed. He was sure that a single strike would suffice to repel Lu Yi. At least that was the case before. Yet just now Lu Yi had managed to parry several thrusts of his spear. His strength seemed to have undergone a tremendous, inexplicable, and even undeniably abnormal surge. He glanced at Lu Yi, beholding a strange sight. There was Lu Yi, swathed in a crimson layer of spiritual power roiling with blood-made energy. The energies churned like rolling flames. Amber, who had been perched on his shoulder all along, was supplying more blood-made energy to Lu Yi, shrouding him in a dusky red luminescence. What on earth is that? Some unknown technique. What He Bing failed to see, without the help of any spiritual vision-based abilities, was a blood-red glyph hovering right over Lu Ye's chest, working its magic. Lu Yi seldom used glyph, blood rage. It had been a while since he had encountered any enemies who had given him cause for such a bitter struggle. Most, if not all of them, were either so feeble that they barely withstood more than one attack from him, or it was he who was defeated that way. Blood rage required time to gradually build up its effect for any results to show, and that made it difficult and inconvenient to harness. But this battle had been a unique experience for him. A battle against such a powerful enemy would have been decided in a second if it were single combat. Yet, with Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan present to fight alongside him, this had turned into a chance for blood rage to prove its worth. Right when the battle first began, Lu Yi had constructed the glyph over his own chest. The wounds that he collected and the blood that he had lost, all of them had helped blood rage to channel to its fullest, and that had engendered a profound transformation in his strength and power. He might still be a third order, but the power he now unleashed could match what fourth orders could. Given enough time, blood rage could give him an augmentation in his power that could equal fifth orders or even higher. Once he could go toe-to-toe against He Bing, he could change the outcome, rather than being just a desperate attempt to survive. Whatever reservations He Bing harbored, he dismissed them all. He had come too far to allow any second thoughts to come in the way of winning this battle. No one would falter at this juncture. It was either to win or to die. Li Baxian rose to his feet, getting up beside Lu Yi. With his spiritual power, he staunched the wounds that beset him. His wounds pulsated with morbid vigor, writhing and convulsing as if in protest to the healing, while his sinews slithered to repair themselves. The airborne shafts, now scattered everywhere, swiftly converge under his command. Pointing his long sword at the enemy with steely resolve, he croaked hoarsely, "Advance." In unison, the two figures darted valiantly forward, attacking He Bing from both flanks. Feng Yuechan began letting loose one flurry of spells after another, not seeking to kill or to maim, but to disperse the focus of the enemy and relieve as much strain from Li Baxian and Lu Yi as possible. Chapter 518, The Secret Technique of the Myriad Beast Domain. The embers of battle rekindled once again. Only this time, He Bing was no longer as confident and calm as he was before, for he was now certain of Lu Ye's growth in his prowess. It was as Lu Yi expected. The earlier onset of the battle was a struggle for their survival. But now, they possessed the means to turn the tables, even if the means were short-lived. The elevation in Lu Ye's power did not come without its cost. It was fueled by his own vitality that blood rage tapped into. Wielding the strength and power of a fourth order, Lu Yi could deliver strokes faster and stronger than before. All of that would naturally inflict a certain degree of strain on his body. In this state, he could only keep on fighting for less than half his normal duration. Once the time limit expired, he would be depleted. But if they lacked the means to put up an equal fight, then all other considerations would be futile. The heightened strength and speed Lu Yi was showing did not go unnoticed by He Bing. Li Baxian was equally aware of it. He did not know what had Lu Yi done, but it undeniably helped to tilt the scales in their favor, and that called for an immediate alteration in their previous strategy. The battle against He Bing started with Lu Yi in a supporting role. But now, Lu Yi would be leading the attack, with Li Baxian rotating into the supporting role to rectify any gaps in their defense. Additionally, with Feng Yuechan to help divert He Bing's attention, the battle has effectively transformed into anyone's game. This time they would no longer be easily repelled by He Bing like before. With Lu Yi at the forefront, they now had the capability to exchange blows with the Seventh Order on almost equal grounds. Especially since the scales were tipping more in their favor with each passing second. In the meantime, He Bing was growing increasingly despondent. His enemies possessed cultivation ranks far lower than his own. He had every confidence of winning them all in single combat. It would take only 10 seconds. In fact, he would have done that if it were just two enemies. But there were three. The two would ceaselessly rain hails of attacks on him in close range, while the third would pepper him relentlessly with spells while maintaining her distance. All that was putting him in quite a fix. What should have been a one-sided beatdown presided by him was thwarted by their seamless collaboration. Instead of killing at least one of them, they were now slowly gaining up on him. Especially the third-order combat cultivator. Bing did not know what really happened, but somehow the Third Order was getting stronger the longer the fight went on. At present they possessed the capability to threaten him. Before too long they might even be able to truly defeat him. Bing seethed with frustration. Had he known about this, he would have rather risked severe injury just so that he could kill or incapacitate one of the three at least. That would have spared him the fate of being ensnared in this stalemate that could very well end up in his defeat. But the opportunity no longer presented itself. The gambit of risking injury just to kill one of them would never work now. Doing so would be tantamount to suicide at this juncture, Bing believed. Hence, it was one option that he would never undertake. Whatever the combat cultivator had done to generate such a surge in his power had to come with a price. Therefore, Bing was confident that all he needed to do was wait. Wait for the moment when the combat cultivator could no longer endure the price that sustained the enhancement in his power. That would mark the moment of his final victory. With that in mind, Bing brandished his spear, forsaking offense for defense. The fact that he, a formidable Seventh Order, was compelled to make such a choice proved an immense humiliation. Nevertheless, a beggar could not be a chooser. So long as he emerged victorious, how he clinched that victory would hold little significance. At any rate, he was fighting against the two of the most famous cultivators ever to walk the Spirit Creek battlefield, the renowned Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. By Bing only defending and not attacking, Lu Yi and Li Baxian would find their attacks useless. Neither of them would be able to penetrate his defenses, let alone deal any significant damage. The streaking radiance of spells being fired flickered incessantly in the dimly lit rocky sprawl, plus the occasional scythe-like energy projectiles and glowing shafts that crisscrossed the area. Bing steadfastly stood his ground, swinging his polearm to parry and deflect whatever attacks that came his way, his presence looming like an eternal and indomitable iceberg that was impervious to any external threats. With glyph, blood rage continually operating, Lu Ye's power was nearing the levels of the Fifth Order. He had been observing Bing's countenance. The Seventh Order was not looking flustered at all when the fight began. But now, Bing was sporting a visibly more serious expression. He was investing his full power into defending every blow they were dishing his way. He could now more or less pose a credible threat to Bing. In fact, if Lu Yi were a real Fifth Order, he might have been able to go toe-to-toe against Bing and perhaps even win. But what he possessed right now was just the artificial power of the Fifth Order, which was inferior if compared to the might of a real Fifth Order. In fact, Lu Yi could feel that he had reached the limits of what enhancements blood rage could afford him. Which was understandably reasonable. There was no way the glyph had no limitation, especially after it had elevated his power by 2 ranks. That alone discounted any doubt as to glyph, Bloodrage's potency, despite its weakness that it needed time to channel before its enhancement could be significant enough to make any difference. More than 15 minutes had elapsed since they entered the pocket dimension of the Nine Realms Scroll, and that was what helped Blood Rage to reach its full potential. The collective might of all three of them could now resist Bing. But they would still need more than that. Bing was grateful for his own patience. Rather than succumbing to his panic, his decision to focus on defense had paid off and he still had a lot of strength left. He was not surprised that Lu Yi had methods that could enhance his power. But what amazed him was the extent of growth in his power because of this unknown method. Yet, Bing knew very well that the enhancement would not be without its cost. The higher the growth, the greater the cost must be. In fact, he could see that the enhancement had reached its limit. Lu Yi appeared to be at his peak at the moment and all he had to do was just hold on. The clangor of steel reverberated through the air as Lu Yi and Li Baxian's figures intertwined like a pair of wraiths, yet nothing they did could penetrate Bing's defenses. A sense of unease crept over Li Baxian. The current status quo might appear favorable, but he knew that perils still lurked unseen. More than 7/10 of the offense was now being shouldered by Lu Yi. Once glyph, Blood Rage had reached its time limit, their defeat would become inevitable. If only they could conclude this battle quickly. But with Bing now choosing to defend rather than attack, he clearly intended to prolong the fight. But if they failed to end this battle before Lu Ye's power plummeted, then this would become their final resting place. Li Baxian still had one little trick hidden up his sleeve, but the final ace could only be used if he was absolutely sure that employing it would seal their victory, or else, using it would only cause more harm than good. Amidst the ferocious combat, Li Baxian cast a glance toward Lu Yi and found himself taken aback. Lu Yi looked completely unfazed, his countenance utterly devoid of any hint of impatience or panic. Every strike he made emanated focused effort, and Li Baxin felt inspired with the same calmness and composure. Indeed, if his junior brother could keep his cool despite the dire situation, why should he panic? As a more experienced cultivator than Lu Yi, he should be stronger than his junior. So what if they were to die here? Such was the life of being a cultivator. The revelation helped to restore a sense of peace and clarity in Li Baxin. At the same time, Li Baxin wondered if his senses were deceiving him. He was picking up a tinge of bestial power mingling within Lu Ye's aura. Even his movements betrayed a never-before-seen quality comparable to an untamed ferocious beast. Meanwhile, Lu Ye's mind was beginning to experience a change. Whatever sensation he felt, it defied description. Never had he experienced this surrealistic feeling before. The protracted duration of this battle and the passage of time had deepened his blood energy link with Amber, intertwining and resonating inexplicably. This resonance exceeded the mere amalgamation of their blood energy. It entailed the fusion of his own spiritual power with Amber's mutant powers as a spirit beast. Gradually, this resonance left a vague and peculiar impression that Amber was a part of him, and this impression grew increasingly tangible. That was when he realized what was going on. He had never anticipated a breakthrough at this juncture. But the battle had dragged on for an extended duration, allowing him to accumulate ample confidence and experience and reach a point where he could unleash his true potential. The opponent he encountered in the Myriad Beast domain was very, very powerful, but the battle did not last long enough for Lu Yi to reach his full potential. A gleam of hope for victory glimmered in Lu Ye's eyes, and his attacks grew more ferocious. Undeniably, it was the Beast Pact art that he acquired from the Myriad Beast domain that proved instrumental in this struggle. Since forming a bond with Amber through the life energy art, the tiger's mere presence alone could grant him tremendous assistance. Lu Yi would have long succumbed to exhaustion if it had not been for Amber. The power he drew from Amber allowed him to swing his weapon without worrying about any strain and exertion. As the battle continued, the mingling of their blood energy and spiritual power propelled the Beast Pact art toward breakthrough and evolution. That came with the realization that Glyph, Blood Rage and the Beast Pact art could work in synergy. The resonance with Amber grew stronger and deeper until a particular point when Lu Yi distinctly felt it. An unbreakable connection between him and Amber. Amber was now an integral part of his very corporeal existence. Both man and tiger have become one. Beneath the folds of his tunic, the tiger head mark on his chest burst with a sudden radiant brilliance, followed by a beckoning, mysterious force. That was when Amber pounced off Lu Ye's shoulder and transformed into a stream of light that surged down his chest and into the mark. Waves of energy pulsed from the mark, its power coursing through every fiber of Lu Ye's being and revitalizing what strength he had spent, plus the soreness and pain that came with using Glyph, Blood Rage. Like an invigorating shower of magic, the waves of energy eradicated all fatigue from him, restoring him with renewed vitality. Every gash and bruise was gone. Even his throbbing right arm had ceased its trembling. The macabre glow that engulfed him was replaced by a resplendent orange radiance. Orange. The fusion of red, Lu Ye's blood energy and his spiritual power, and gold, Amber's mutant energy. This newfound source of power manifested as a pair of ethereal tiger ears on his head and a tiger's tail at his back. The new appendage swayed gently, lifelike. The mightiest secret technique of the Myriad Beast domain. Beast form. Chapter 519 He Bing Must Die. Beast Masters were a crop of enigmatic and yet interesting cultivators. Jianghu's very own breed of Beast Masters had strayed from the true essence of beast mastery by fixating on the acquisition and the taming and nurturing of spirit beasts to be used for battle while neglecting the cultivation of their own strength. As a result, the Beast Masters of Jianghu lacked personal prowess. In their pursuit of numbers, many of them came to possess multiple spirit beasts, with some even boasting dozens or 20 of such creatures in their command. In the early stages of their cultivation, the Beast Masters had succeeded in overpowering their opponents through sheer numerical advantage. This led them astray, gradually deviating from the right path. They became so engrossed in nurturing and controlling their spirit beasts that they neglected their own personal development. To that end, the Beast Masters of Jianghu were not renowned for their superiority. In fact, they paled in comparison even to Golem Masters, who, despite their obsession with external elements, had not strayed from the purpose of enhancing their own abilities. Contrarily, the Beast Masters of the Myriad Beast domain took an entirely different approach. They controlled only one spirit beast, one that was life-bound to them through magical seals known as beast pacts. If the methods of the beast masters of Jianghu focused on the beasts, then the ones of the Myriad beast domain prioritized their own cultivation, which should have been the actual and proper path for all beast masters. And the pinnacle of beast mastery lay in the technique known as beast form. Back when Lu Yi was still in the Myriad beast domain, deep within the underground insectoid nest of the Black Tortoise Sect territory, he encountered a beast, formed Niu Meng, who presented himself with the appearance of a formidable beast. That, plus the insectoid nucleus, allowed Niu Meng to embody an abundance of vitality. Single-handedly, he nearly annihilated an entire squad of cultivators consisting of Lu Yi and others. It was only with the instruction of the Grand Elder to break Niu Meng's beast pact to release him from his beast form that they stood a chance of defeating him. At the Ninth Order, just like Niu Meng, Zhou Hai, Peng Dehai, and Xia Qianshan, each possessed considerable strength in their own right. Especially Zhou Haiyan, who was known for his prowess with the sword. Yet their collective might, eclipsed by the might of Niu Meng's brute strength, did not prevent Zhou Hai from suffering massive abuse by Niu Meng, a testament to the tremendous power bestowed by the beast form technique. During their time in the secret realm of the Myriad beast domain, Lu Yi had created a beast pact with Amber and had learned the secrets of beast form, although he had not yet found the opportunity to reach the state, until today. Beast form was not something that could be triggered at will, rather, it required extensive accumulation. However, this battle with He Bing provided the opportunity he had been waiting for. His survival instincts, the resolve to defeat He Bing, and his bond and unity with Amber, the fusion of their blood aura, spiritual power, and Amber's innate mutant aura, all fulfilled Lu Ye's prerequisite conditions to enter beast form state. But Lu Ye's current transformation fell short of reaching Niu Meng's level. Unlike Niu Meng's change that saw him almost transfigured with real spirit beast features, Lu Ye's body was enveloped in an orange glow, with amber luminescent tiger ears and tail appearing as distinct features. This change left not only He Bing astounded, but also dumbfounded Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan. It had only been 20 days since Lu Yi had sold the Beast Pact technique to the Divine Trade Association, and up until now, no Beast Master in Jianghu had ever achieved beast form yet. That was why He Bing, Li Baxin, and Feng Yuechan had never witnessed such a phenomenon before, and no one knew what was happening. But He Bing understood that the situation was spiraling out of his control. Whatever change was happening to Lu Yi, his already formidable aura was scaling up to unprecedented heights. In fact, he exuded an unbridled ferocity, his blood surging through every vein and artery with speed and intensity, and his spiritual power emanated like a blazing furnace, reminiscent of an ancient beast of boundless savageness broken free from its confines. Back in the cave, Yi was clutching the Nine Realms scroll firmly in her fingers, diligently maintaining its operation, when Lu Yi entered beast form. Ripples swept across the surface of the scroll like an earthquake, indicating an excessive strain within the spatial confines of the scroll's pocket dimension. It was not the scroll failing, but rather Yi wasn't supplying enough spiritual power to allow the scroll to operate at a capacity where it could sustain the sudden surge in power. Yi hastened to bolster the amount of spiritual power she was injecting into the scroll, and that finally stopped the trembling. In the meantime, feeling the unnatural winds billowing in the midst of the rock column sprawl in resonance with his burgeoning spiritual power, Lu Yi could feel a surrealistic sensation. A complete change in his perception of the world around him. Everything seemed to have slowed down around him, so much so that it afforded him a clear view of everything. The look of surprise and panic now flickering in He Bing's stare, the beads of blood trickling from Li Baxin's forehead, and the gradual formation of Feng Yuechan's sorcery. There wasn't any change in their speeds, it wasn't their movements that had slowed. But it was his movements that had accelerated, causing that unreal sensation. Without warning, He Bing lunged forward, his spear thrusting straight for Lu Yi with the intensity of a serpent while blasting Li Baxin aside before the latter could do anything. Even so, He Bing's instincts tingled wildly, warning him about some unknown, imminent danger. Lu Ye's growth in this battle had far outstripped his comprehension. What he initially thought was a secure victory since he had been playing safe had not turned out the way he expected. Instead of becoming weaker, Lu Yi had turned stronger. That prompted him to abandon his initial plan to defend and attack instead. Only this time, it was Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan that daunted him not one bit at all. The difference in their power and his was apparent enough. Rather, it was Lu Yi who started out as the weakest combatant in this skirmish that has now become the actual threat to him. Come on, come on. Hack him, hack him. A voice resounded within the depths of Lu Ye's heart all of a sudden, one reminiscent of a babyish, fierce toddler, crying out at him as He Bing's spear tip drew near. Inviolable was halfway through deflecting away the incoming blow when Lu Yi heard the disembodied voice. Startled by the sudden sound, what strength he gathered wavered momentarily, diminishing its potency by a fraction. With a resounding clang, sparks flew and flames splashed in all directions as Lu Ye's figure hurtled backward. He Bing, fueled by his newfound momentum, unleashed a vicious flurry of blows, enveloping Lu Yi within its whirlwind, while at the same time, he was secretly relieved to find that Lu Ye's sudden spurt of power did not exceed his anticipation. He had overestimated Lu Yi, or so he believed. Strike after strike, Lu Yi retreated steadily. Inviolable was now an instrument of defense rather than of offense, parrying and sideswiping away desperately every attack He Bing was throwing at him. And with every stroke, the same disembodied, childlike voice squealed deep within his mind, ceaselessly chattering with a fierce and spirited tone like an incessantly annoying commentary. Left, left. Here comes the right side. Oh heavens, that was sloppy. Strike at him, not his spear. What's the point of hitting his weapon anyway? That's pathetic. Stab him in the stomach. In his chest. Gods, do you even know how to fight? Good chance, bite him. Bite him in the neck. Go, go, go. Every time Lu Yi wanted to do anything, the voice would appear. If anything, it was more bothersome than helpful. Lu Yi was still baffled as to the origin of the voice, up until he heard it urging him to bite He Bing in the neck. That was when Lu Yi realized the source. Amber? What? So it really is you. Lu Yi mused deep inside. Astonished, Lu Yi marveled at the fact that he could clearly hear Amber's voice even in his beast form state. It wasn't Amber speaking directly, but a manifestation of their deep spiritual connection. Amber was able to transform into a cat at will, but it could not quite yet transfigure itself into humanoid form. It could not communicate in the human tongue, but it has all along been able to forge spiritual connections, and entering beast form had created a link between it and Lu Yi, allowing them both to communicate directly. For one moment, Lu Yi did not know how to react. After knowing the tiger for so long, he knew nothing about the tiger's behavior. Be quiet, he scowled at the tiger. All right, all right. Amber yelped a reply and stayed silent after that, allowing Lu Yi to stay focused. Meanwhile, He Bing was wearing a smug grin. Still under the mistaken impression that Lu Yi must have relied on some incredible technique, he was thinking that whatever transformation Lu Yi might have undergone, it did not translate into the superiority He Bing feared and anticipated. The combat cultivator clearly was forced to remain on the defensive against his relentless onslaught. 10 blows. That was the limit of how long the young combat cultivator would last, he surmised, if the sword cultivator and the spell cultivator had not been constant nuisances. At least that was what he believed back then, until a sudden upstroke of the combat cultivator's saber carried such an indescribably ferocious burst of spiritual power that it bashed his spear off course. The strength of his opponent's blow shocked him. Seizing the opportunity, Lu Yi pressed forward, not giving his foe any time to react at all. But the latter was stunned. He did not see a human lunging at him with reckless abandon. All he saw was a ferocious predator swooping down on him like a tiger out for blood. Again and again, Lu Yi hurled endless blows at his foe, the ferocity of the assault so overwhelming that He Bing turned from surprised to terrified. The combat cultivator that he had regarded with indifference if not contempt had transformed into an entirely different person, exuding even greater strength than before. Sword and saber gnashed against spear while blood trickled and splattered, some from Lu Yi plus some from He Bing. Up until now, He Bing had received nothing more than just the scar that Li Baxin had left long ago when the fight was in its initial stage. Aside from that, He Bing had otherwise remained unscathed. But Lu Ye's present strength and power equaled that of a fifth order because of glyph, blood rage, making him quite close to He Bing's level of prowess. That plus beast form gave Lu Yi what he needed to surpass He Bing. What Lu Yi received from beast form was more than just an increase in strength, speed, and power. The influence of Amber's animalistic nature rubbed off most prominently, leading him to become unprecedentedly wild and violent. His assaults became attacks driven by an insatiable bloodlust that he became immune to any fear or sense of self-preservation. He Bing was finding himself overwhelmed by Lu Ye's relentless onslaught. Feng Yuechan and Li Baxin's eyes lit up at the astonishing shift in the battle. They quickly threw in what they could: spells, attacks, flying shafts, anything that they could put into play to support Lu Ye's advance. He Bing's situation grew increasingly dire. Realizing how the tables had been turned against him, He Bing frantically proposed a truce. Shall we call it a draw? There's no need to fight to the death. Never did He Bing expect, since the onset of this battle, that he would be the one proposing peace. What should have been easy pickings turned into him sailing perilously close to the winds. At this critical juncture, he could no longer underestimate Lu Yi and his companions. Lu Yi, however, remained silent. He could see no room for any negotiation, not after all the fighting until now. This gauntlet could only be solved with the death of either side, and He Bing still had the advantage. As soon as beast form and glyph, blood rage ran out, Lu Ye's strength and power would be back to the levels of the Third Order. If He Bing was still around, they would be left vulnerable. Furthermore, Lu Yi had no intention of revealing the secret of his teleportation ward. With Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan both identified, sparing him would only pose unnecessary risks. At any rate, He Bing's fate was sealed. He had to die. Chapter 520 Slaying He Bing. The dance of blades continued unabated within the clutter of the stone column sprawl. Lu Yi, in his beast form state, unleashed each slash with unprecedented speed and power. He Bing valiantly defended himself with his long spear, but the back of his hand was beginning to split open from the force of Lu Ye's relentless assault. His spiritual power surged tempestuously, yet his situation was growing increasingly precarious. Amidst the chaos, Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan provided steadfast support from the sidelines, skillfully distracting He Bing's attention and creating openings for Lu Yi. It was in one such moment that Lu Ye's long saber homed in at He Bing's chest with the intensity of a serpent lunging at its prey. Fear and panic flickered in He Bing's eyes as he desperately leaned back, leaving himself perilously exposed. As much as he wished to deflect the imminent blow, there was no way his movements could make it in time. Lu Ye's current strength had soared to unprecedented heights, rendering He Bing's protective aura too weak to keep him safe against this attack. If struck, it would surely result in a fatal wound that could even mean his death. But just as death seemed inevitable, He Bing defiantly mustered an unexpected surge of spiritual power. A luminous triangular-shaped energy barrier materialized out of thin air, interposing itself before him and thwarting Inviolable's lethal advance. But the fear of death was real. He Bing was genuinely terrified. Anyone who saw his face could read that clearly. Surprise and curiosity etched across Lu Ye's countenance as he observed the intricate patterns adorning the impromptu defensive shield. He swiftly recognized what it was: glyph, protection. Was He Bing a glyph warlock too? No. If He Bing really was a glyph caster, then he should have used glyphs during the battle. But he didn't, and that only meant one thing. He Bing did not know glyph casting, but he must have glyphs tattooed on his body. Even for cultivators, tattooed glyphs remained a true rarity. Few possessed the knowledge and skills, plus the resources needed to cast tattooed glyphs. In fact, the physical constitution of most cultivators in the Cloud River realm could only allow them to carry only a single tattooed glyph, as any more would prove unbearable. He Bing's tattooed glyph must be on his chest, and the burst of spiritual power he just released must be what activated it. That was what saved his life just now. Therefore, Lu Yi was sure that being He Bing's hidden ace, the glyph must be something he would only use in the most desperate moment. But it was a very surrealistic sensation. Until now, Lu Yi had always been the one using glyph protection, not the other way around. To see firsthand how his attack, a fatal blow that would have ended this skirmish, was thwarted by the same glyph was something new. Undeterred, Lu Yi prepared to press on and attack once more. Yet even before he could act, Li Baxian, who had been providing auxiliary support, sprang into action. The scattered shafts of light that had been circling around him converged and melded into a single formidable blade Li Baxian held aloft, his countenance solemn and his aura a steely cold presence. A frigid miasma of impending death swept across the site of the battle, and Li Baxian vanished, assuming the form of a gigantic sword of light himself, unsheathed and poised for slaughter. Ever since Lu Ye's beast form transformation, Li Baxian had relegated himself to a supporting role, never aiming to harm or kill the adversary. Instead, he sought only to distract and divert his attention. But now that He Bing had activated his final ace, Li Baxian evidently thought it was finally time for him to unleash his full might. The radiance of the sword shining with a resplendent illumination upon all reached even the eaves of the cavern as the sword of light struck at the luminescent shield like a thunderbolt in full wrath. The blinding light engulfed Li Baxin reappeared before He Bing the moment the gigantic sword of light made contact with He Bing's glyph. Protection, its tip hovering unyieldingly at just a mere hair's breadth from the glyph. The cascading din of metal twisting followed before an eruption of power ensued. A thunderous boom reverberated through the air as the invincible glyph, protection, burst into pieces of energy dregs like fragile glass. Such was the terrible strength of sword cultivators. Despite being 3 tiers lower than He Bing in cultivation level, Li Baxin had managed to destroy the final bulwark that he relied upon for dear life. But that sapped Li Baxin of the entirety of his strength, leaving him open for He Bing to retaliate with a belligerent swing of his spear, viciously lashing aside the pallid, drained sword cultivator like a ragdoll. Lu Yi sprang into action. Seizing this opportune moment that Li Baxin had created by putting his own life on the line, Lu Yi descended upon his adversary with Inviolable ready for the kill. His special move, Flash. Terror surged in He Bing's eyes as he desperately sought to reactivate his glyph, protection using his spiritual power, but he was too slow, too late. The saber swept down in a deadly arc and all He Bing saw was the phantom of a tiger materializing behind Lu Yi with a roar that echoed across the entire length and breadth of the cave. The frenetic chaos abruptly succumbed to stillness. Lu Yi maintained his frozen pose with his blade held before him as if time stood still in stasis, although blood dribbled down the sharp edges of Inviolable in a steady stream. Drip. A faint sound shattered the newfound tranquility. Feng Yuechan pursed her ruby lips together, her gaze fixed upon He Bing and her spell warily poised for release. 3 yards away from Lu Yi, He Bing stood there, petrified with his spear still thrust forward. The glyph, protection he activated quietly dissipated away, vanishing into the air like dust. His eyes twitched as he glanced at the figure who had just attacked him, his visage contorted with disbelief and unwillingness. Next second, He Bing fell backward, landing flat on his back as the impact separated his severed head and his torso, his gaze wide-eyed and unblinking with lingering unwillingness and disbelief. Phew! It was only at that moment that Feng Yuechan finally exhaled, retracting her spiritual power. Hastily, she rushed towards Li Baxin with distress and concern etched upon her features as she assessed his condition. Meanwhile, Lu Yi sank to the ground, limbs sprawled haphazardly, his gaze fixated upon the expanse above shifting magically. His vision blurred momentarily, and he found himself once again within the confines of the underground cavern. The battle had concluded and they had triumphed. Lu Yi, are you all right? Yi cautiously approached, her gaze filled with trepidation as she observed Lu Yi, who looked like he had just been dunked face-first into a vat of blood. Her voice trembled, tinged with the threat of tears. I'm all right. What about Brother Baxin? Li Baxin weakly croaked in response. Right here. I'm fine. Li Baxin, though in better condition, still showed signs of exhaustion after unleashing his secret sword technique. The final blow had drained him entirely. Lu Yi was relieved to hear that everyone had survived. Just as the tension eased, a sudden eruption of crimson stained the air, revealing the figure of Amber. Yet, the creature appeared disheveled, indicating the toll that beast form had taken on it. In that fleeting moment of vulnerability, an overwhelming surge of fatigue and exhaustion overtook Lu Yi, his every ounce of energy and spirit utterly spent. This weariness wasn't solely the consequence of beast form but also the drawback of glyph, blood rage plus the injuries He Bing had left on him, all of which proved to be an unbearable burden. Struggling to speak, Lu Yi managed only a single sentence, I need rest. And with that, his consciousness succumbed to darkness. Startled, Yi hurriedly checked Lu Ye's condition, relieved to find him stable. Li Baxin, too, descended into a deep slumber, while Amber curled protectively by Lu Ye's side. The job of making sure that the men could rest in peace now fell on Feng Yuechan and Yi's shoulders. Yi carefully tended to Lu Ye's wounds and administered healing pills before she spoke. Senior Sister Feng, I'll leave them to you. I will be outside keeping watch for anything. Feng Yuechan nodded her agreement. With Lu Yi and Li Baxin now unconscious after the vicious and gritting fight, they would all be dead meat if anyone were to intrude into this cave and keep them all pinned inside. Yi's ability to move freely underground made her the perfect candidate to stand guard outside and monitor for any unwanted visitors. After all, Lu Yi had always relied on her to scout around and reconnoiter unknown areas for enemies. Meanwhile, the sudden surge in carnage points behind Lu Ye's name had sparked intrigue among many who had been keeping tabs on the developments on the carnage roster. His increments had always been in the hundreds lately, especially for the huge increase when he slew the enemy 6th Order, and that had piqued the attention of certain quarters who had begun observing him. It did not take long for others to conclude that he must be a low-tiered Cloud River realm cultivator. There were only so many reasons behind his frequently large increments, and the most commonly known way was slaying enemies beyond one's cultivation rank. With a 250-point surge, more people stopped to wonder who was unlucky enough to be his prey. It was worth noting that killing a 9th Order would only result in a 60-point reward, and yet Lu Ye's reward was more than 4 times that amount. 500 miles away was a disgruntled Wei Kei who was scowling at the Carnage roster with palpable frustration. He was aware that Lu Ye's cultivation level stood nowhere higher than the 3rd Order. A 250-point escalation undoubtedly signified that Lu Yi had slain an enemy 7th Order. The notion of a 3rd Order successfully slaying a 7th Order bordered on the unimaginable. Even with the assistance of Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan, it strained credulity. And yet, the evidence lay glaringly before Wei Kei's eyes. But what irritated him wasn't Lu Ye's gain of Carnage points. He could care less about Lu Ye's performance in this Carnage Coliseum, especially since he did not have any intention of climbing the rankings at all. His objective had been Lu Yi all along. And because of that, he was certain that he was heading the wrong way. A battle with an enemy 7th Order as their adversary would have caused quite a commotion. Yet he had traveled so far and found no signs of them. Where were they? How did they manage to evade his detection? Wei Kei found himself utterly confused. As time slipped away, the rankings on the Carnage roster experienced more change, with the gaps between the 2nd and 10th positions becoming smaller and smaller to the extent that a single battle could propel one's position upward by several places. But what intrigued and gladdened those trying to climb the Carnage roster was how Lu Ye's Carnage points had gone stagnant. Lu Ye's points had remained static for extended periods before, but they had typically increased by several hundred points almost daily afterward. Yet now, Lu Ye's tally had plateaued at 3,990 and had remained there for quite some time without any increments. His former lead of more than 1,000 points had been so commanding that many had felt catching up to him was more impossible than daunting. But his present inactivity ignited renewed determination among the rest of the Carnage Coliseum contestants, compelling them to intensify their hunt for enemies to rake in more Carnage points. 3 more days passed by and the 2nd-ranked Sheng finally succeeded in usurping Lu Ye's spot at the top of the Carnage roster. Ecstatic at his achievement, Sheng couldn't help but wonder if Lu Yi had already met his demise. Yet, the persistent presence of Lu Ye's name on the board indicated otherwise. That would mean that Lu Yi must be hurt or recovering from a fierce battle. His guess was right. Lu Yi was indeed busy recuperating. While his injuries weren't overly severe, his body needed respite. A day or 2 of rest would typically be enough for him to recover from the strains of the gritting battle against Yibing, but the compounded drawbacks of using beast form and glyph blood rage was what enveloped him in a perpetual state of weakness. Recalling a similar weakness he experienced when he once used glyph Fire Phoenix back when he was still in the Spirit Creek battlefield, Lu Yi lamented how Hua Ci was present then. Her tender care had facilitated swift recovery on that occasion. Chapter 521 The Golden Body Token. After 3 days of much-needed rest, Lu Ye's strength was replenished and Li Baxian regained his vigor. With almost 10 days elapsing, there was no telling when this time's Carnage Coliseum would end. In general, Carnage Coliseums typically remained open for a period of 2 to 4 weeks. However, there had been no record of any precise pattern of how long this enclosed dimension stayed open. No one knew exactly how long Carnage Coliseums lasted, and at the conclusion of each Carnage Coliseum, the enigmatic entity known as the Heavens would begin the distribution of spoils based on one's position on the Carnage roster. Once enjoying an impressive lead in the Carnage roster rankings, Lu Ye's position had now slipped to 4th place. It was not entirely unexpected. The rest of the elites that dominated the roster had been relentlessly killing and maiming just so that they could overtake him during his recuperation period. But Lu Yi was not one to accept defeat easily. If it were before he joined up with Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan, he would have cared less about his placing on the roster. But after all the hard work to claim the first spot, he was not willing to throw in the towel and watch all that effort go to waste. With his health restored, a fierce determination brewed to reclaim the coveted first place within him. Yet, before he could try clambering his way back to the first spot, he had to attend to some preparations, foremost among them setting up the crucial teleportation wards. The teleportation ward at the cave where they were taking refuge failed to link him to any other wards. If an enemy were to step into this cave, Lu Yi and his companions would be trapped inside. In spite of all that, Lu Yi felt nothing but a mix of exasperation and frustration. He had taken extra care to construct his teleportation wards in obscure corners of the Colosseum grounds, either in the deep recesses of some underground burrows or the depths of subterranean caves. Yet he was acutely aware that if he, with all his resourcefulness, could discover these hidden spots, there was a chance, however slim, that others might stumble upon them as well. Any other cultivator might venture into one of these many caves or burrows and trigger the explosive wards, obliterating everything he had so meticulously crafted. Therefore, the more teleportation wards he could construct the better, so that he would still have others to rely on as insurance. Lu Yi got ready before he slipped out of the cave alone. What should have been a clear blue sky outside was a morbid red sheen blotting out the sunlight. The force field of the Carnage Colosseum phenomena had effectively cast across the entire length and breadth of its grounds a macabre feel of hopelessness. Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan did not come with him. They were still in the cave. The perilous task of constructing the wards demanded extreme caution and stealth, making it a mission Lu Yi best undertook alone. More so, since Lu Yi had the means to render himself invisible even if he were to encounter any 8th or 9th orders, while Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan could barely boast of any technique of the kind. Lu Yi traveled for almost 200 miles. His memory led him to a cave he once found before. This was the same spot where he had constructed one of his teleportation wards before. But the inside of the cave was filled with debris and the place bore the hallmarks of a huge explosion resulting from a surge of spiritual power before. Someone must have been hurt when the explosive ward went off, meaning that the one who had triggered the ward had to be a low-tiered Cloud River realm cultivator. Most 8th or 9th orders would have been able to walk away from such an explosion unscathed. Lu Yi examined the structural integrity of the cave, concluding finally that it was still strong enough before he cleared the place of all the debris and began reconstructing the wards. Someone might have come here before, but Lu Yi was confident that whoever it was, he or she had found nothing except for a huge explosion that must have been an awfully terrible surprise. To that end, he was sure that the intruder would not come back here. The work took a little more than an hour, then Lu Yi tried testing the teleportation ward. It worked fine, linking not only to the one in the cave Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan, but to another ward that was apparently still functioning as well. Back when he first constructed his first set of teleportation wards, there were 12. But after everything that had happened, he did not know how many of the wards were still working. That was because the wards were linked to one another like a chain instead of a widely connected network. That allowed him to only sense the existence of other teleportation wards through immediate pairings and not others. With his work done here, Lu Yi got out of the cave and rendered himself invisible again before he traveled for another 200 miles. With Yi Yi's help, he found another suitable spot where he constructed another teleportation ward. This time, this ward was created so that it could link to the one he had just built and the one that was in the cave where Li Baxin was still at. This would allow him to have two options to choose in the event of a quick retreat. Even if one of them were destroyed, he would still have one more to rely on. After He Bing, Lu Yi knew better than to be careless again. The last thing he wanted was another fight with an opponent as powerful as a 7th order. They might have triumphed against He Bing in the end, but not without a huge risk and cost. They had nearly lost their own lives during the course of defeating He Bing, and the toll of the battle had taken them 3 days to recover, which was devastating enough for all the work that they had put in to maintain Lu Ye's first position on the Carnage roster. Defeating enemies of the 4th or 5th order was more efficient, way less risky, and definitely more rewarding. Lu Yi constructed 2 more teleportation wards before he finally contacted Li Baxin to make sure that he was still safe. He stood on his freshly built ward and vanished. Reappearing back at the cave where Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan were still sheltered, he regrouped with them and together they slipped out of the cave. Under the ominous claret sky hanging overhead, Lu Yi and his companions continued their cautious journey for more than 10 miles before Lu Yi stopped to construct some wards to mask his companions' spiritual power signatures. Next, he selected another suitable spot and built a trap ward there as a precautionary measure in case of meeting powerful enemies. When that was done, Lu Yi hid himself and waited for any unsuspecting prey. As time passed with the painstaking pace of a glacier, Lu Yi decided on a brief moment of respite by glancing up at the Carnage roster to check his place. There he saw his position slipping to 7th place, which would only award him 3 gold amulets, a far cry from the rewards of the first prize. In the meantime, enthroned upon the highly coveted first place was Sheng, who, by some unknown luck, had built an impressive lead of 300 points, leaving others struggling to catch up. It was Lu Ye's 3-day dormancy that had given the runners-up any semblance of hope to keep catching up in spite of his initial lead of more than 1,000 points. 6 hours breezed by uneventfully until a group of cultivators soared nearby, their cautious demeanor indicating their relatively modest cultivation levels. That they were maintaining a low altitude, barely 30 meters above ground level, despite using magical conveyance that would have allowed them to fly higher and faster confirmed as much. Clearly, they wanted to be able to hit the ground fast so that they could hide themselves immediately in the event of encountering strong adversaries. Li Baxian seized the initiative, first to ascertain their allegiances and gauge their power before Feng Yuechan launched any of her potent magical attacks. Lu Yi would be biding his time just like before, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. The group turned out to be enemy cultivators, and the concerted efforts of Lu Yi and his companions took no longer than 30 seconds to make short work of them. The trio efficiently cleaned up the site of the battle, leaving no trace of their presence before retreating with their hard-earned spoils and Lu Yi with his ward flags and keystones, ready for another ambush. Despite the seamless progression of their battles, maintaining unwavering vigilance remained imperative. One could never predict when trouble might come visiting in the Carnage Coliseum, an enemy 8th or 9th order for instance. To that end, the trio staunchly adhered to their steadfast principle of not laying ambushes in the same location twice. Upon their return to the subterranean cavern, Lu Yi began undoing the magical seals of the looted storage bags. They divided the spoils amongst themselves before they traveled to another spot using Lu Ye's teleportation ward. After a brief interlude for recuperation, they made ready to resume raiding. True to form, each passing day saw Lu Yi amassing hundreds of carnage points, steadily accumulating until the 13th day of the Colosseum when his total tally reached an impressive 5,440 points. His ranking ascended, settling him comfortably in the 6th position. Yet, despite this commendable pace, it became apparent that regaining the top spot of the Carnage roster had become an unattainable aspiration. The gap that separated him from the current frontrunner Tan Sheng was now a chasm too vast for him to traverse. As an elite 9th order, Tan Sheng could venture everywhere freely without having to worry that he might be attacked. No one in their right mind would do such a thing. So long as he avoided encounters with any elite Grand Sky Coalition 9th orders, Tan Sheng had nothing to fear. In stark contrast, Lu Yi and his comrades had to navigate their every move with the utmost caution, wary of leaving even the faintest trace that might attract the attention of any fearsome enemies. Yet, such predicaments were unavoidable, for their own cultivation levels were just undeniably and dishearteningly too low. A profound weakness that had plagued them relentlessly since the moment they stepped into the Cloud River battlefield. Nevertheless, the rewards for securing the 6th position on the Carnage roster were far from modest. Despite being just one step above the 7th place, the winner of the 6th position would be awarded a bountiful sum of 5 gold amulets. Within the sanctuary of their concealed mountain cave, Lu Yi was sitting right on top of his teleportation ward. He had finished undoing the magical seals on the storage bags and divided them into 3 equal portions. Everyone took their own share. Such a methodical allocation of spoils had become customary for cultivators, making the contents of each individual storage bags contingent upon the capricious whims of fortune. Regrettably, the majority of findings proved unremarkable, a motley collection of inconspicuous trinkets. Some of the bags contained amulets, but their qualities were hardly anything worth celebrating. These amulets were undoubtedly loot foraged from endowment events that occurred all around the Colosseum grounds. What a pity that these amulets were gathered only to fall into the hands of Lu Yi and his companions, inadvertently saving them a huge hassle. One after another, the trio emptied the storage bags of their contents before they sorted the loot and classified everything. From his last storage bag, Lu Yi fished out something odd-looking, an authority token the size of his palm. Engraved upon its surface was an intricate emblem reminiscent of a bell, its depiction accentuated by a few subtle strokes suggestive of luminous emanations at the flank, its appearance oddly whimsical, almost inducing a smile from anyone who gazed upon it. Lu Yi had never seen something like that before and thought that it was just a token bearing an insignia belonging to a sect or an order the slain cultivators belonged to. Nonchalantly poised to cast it aside, his hand froze mid-air when Li Baxian unexpectedly interjected. "Hold it, brother. Let me have a look at that," Li Baxian requested, his eyes trained upon Lu Yi. Curiosity piqued, Lu Yi complied, handing the token to Li Baxian. Taking hold of it, Li Baxian examined the object from every angle, even going so far as to give it a gentle squeeze before passing it, still with an air of uncertainty, to Feng Yuechan. "Take a look at this," he urged her. Feng Yuechan studied the object intently, a flicker of recognition igniting her countenance as she muttered, her expression a mix of astonishment and skepticism. "Could it be?" "What do you think?" Li Baxian inquired. "It certainly seems so. I recall coming across similar markings and dimensions in an ancient tome. What a surprise that this too manifested within the Carnage Colosseum. Someone was lucky enough to have stumbled upon it." "Indeed. I wonder who was lucky to have found this. Not lucky enough, I'd say. Whoever owned this, he or she is dead now." The exchange between the two unexpectedly roused Lu Ye's inquisitiveness. Once their conversation had concluded, Lu Ye finally interjected, "What is this token for, Brother Baxian?" Based on Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan's intonation, it clearly seemed that the object held significance far beyond that of a mere identification token. Something so enigmatic that he did not know what it could do at all. "Why, this is a treasure indeed," Li Baxian declared, returning the token to Lu Ye. "This, brother, is none other than the infamous Golden Body Token." "Golden Body Token?" "Yes, brother. You are familiar with Golden Body talismans, I gather?" The Golden Body Token shares similarities with those talismans in that both provide comprehensive protection. However, while the efficacy of a Golden Body talisman depends on the quality of the magical talisman itself, this Golden Body Token is a celestial bestowment by the heavens themselves. In other words, once activated, it possesses an unbreakable aura bestowed by the heavens, rendering anyone cloaked by this aura indestructible and unkillable. Furthermore, its duration of effect far exceeds that of a Golden Body talisman. It can persist for several hours at the very least. Chapter 522, Yet Another Gold Amulet, the Special One? An aura of protection bestowed by the heavens that lasts for hours? Lu Ye could barely comprehend the words he uttered with shock. That's the gist of it. As for how long the aura lasts, I'm not sure myself. I've only heard of the token. This is the first time I'm seeing it up close. It's something that's gifted by the heavens and that makes it extremely rare, added Feng Yuechan. I've heard of people finding Golden Body tokens during their forays into other mystic realms and dimensions, but I've never heard of it being seen in the Carnage Colosseum before. But it should be expected. Endowment events are after all instances where heaven sprinkles gifts and trinkets around. To think that the cultivators we slew were lucky enough to have stumbled on this token, just not lucky enough to survive long enough to even use it. That reminded Lu Ye about one particular detail he had overlooked. During the ambush earlier, one of the 1,000 Demon Ridge cultivators had been rummaging through his storage bag frantically as if he was looking for something. But before he found whatever it was he was finding, he was already cut down by Lu Ye, who had appeared out of nowhere. The poor fellow must have been digging so desperately for his Golden Body token, Lu Ye realized. What else could he be searching for if not for something that would deliver him from harm during that perilous moment? "This is a very rare and useful item, brother. Keep it well. This could save you when all else fails," urged Li Baxian. As a once-in-lifetime gift from heaven, this Golden Body token represented one of the best protection one could ever enjoy. There were few methods that could defeat a divine bulwark as potent as this. The past few days of grueling and life-threatening tribulations, a close shave with an enemy Ninth Order and that vicious battle against Yi Bing, had Li Baxian wondering if luck had finally stopped favoring Lu Ye. But now he knew that his doubts were misplaced. Lucky was still very much Lu Ye's middle name, and gaining possession of this Golden Body token was proof of that. So how do I use this thing?" asked Lu Ye. "Just inject your spiritual power into it," explained Li Baxian. "That's simple enough," a bemused Lu Ye thought as he tucked the token into safekeeping. He could never have enough instruments like this token that could ensure his survival. Instruments whose purposes were more useful and more crucial to him than any weapons or other magical apparatuses, for all humans only live once. Lu Ye and his companions put aside the rest of their loot. It was time for their next ambush. 2 days later, Lu Ye was invisible as he waited patiently for his next targets to appear. His luck had begun to look up markedly since finding the Golden Body token. For the past 2 days, the raids he and his companions had conducted saw his carnage points tally skyrocketing so rapidly. So much so that Lu Ye had reached 3rd place, just a mere 500 points behind the first-place Tan Sheng. It would take just another few more days for him to overtake Tan Sheng and regain his lead. But the optimistic thought was conceived on the premise that Lu Ye still had time. Almost a fortnight had passed since this Carnage Coliseum began, and no one knew for sure if it would end before Lu Yi could knock Tan Sheng off his perch. More than 6 hours had come and gone. A coterie of cultivators had passed by just now, but the ambush had to be called off prematurely when Li Baxin realized that they were Grand Sky Coalition allies when he sprung his trap. Just when they were grappling with boredom and restlessness, a powerful surge of spiritual power came sweeping at their positions. Lu Yi looked in the direction from whence it came. There, several miles away, he could see a bright radiant column of light reaching straight up into the skies, lancing through the clouds overhead. That's the, Lu Yi mused with a mix of recognition and amazement. That's the eruption of spiritual power of that special gold amulet. After witnessing the same eruption 4 times the last time he was chosen to be the unlucky bearer of the unique gold amulet, Lu Yi immediately recognized the phenomena for what it was. But this was his first time seeing it from a distance, and the spectacle really was impressive, if not conspicuous enough. Every day, a cultivator within the Carnage Coliseum was selected to be the bearer of the unique once-a-day gold amulet. But given the sheer expanse of the Coliseum's area, plus the fact that Lu Yi and his companions kept their activities to a tiny range for the sake of security, it was normal to think that Lu Yi had never witnessed the spectacle before until today. Lu Yi was stirred by the notion of the rewards of being in possession of that unique gold amulet, before he dismissed any ambitions of it. It would be foolhardy to head for the gold amulet. The eruption of spiritual power and the ensuing column of light speared right up into the clouds was a gigantic beacon beckoning literally every cultivator, both strong and weak, to come this way, making the notion of going near it nothing but a surefire attempt at suicide. If a 7th order like He Bing could nearly annihilate them all, then an enemy beyond that level would be more difficult if not impossible to defeat. The golden body token could only keep one individual safe, not 2 or 3. In fact, anticipating chaos and carnage, Lu Yi would rather leave this place as quickly as his legs could carry him. By his reckoning, the point where the white spear of light was jutting skyward was but a mere handful of miles away from his position. Any Cloud River Realm cultivator could scale that distance in a matter of seconds. Hence the safer course of action was to walk away instead of running headlong into certain peril. But the thought of fleeing had merely struck him when the silhouette of a lone stranger flitted into view. Looking anxious and distressed, the stranger never stopped looking back as if he was fleeing from pursuers. Gliding at almost 20-odd meters and hugging the treeline, Lu Yi surmised that he must be a 6th order. Cursing and muttering something incomprehensible under his breath, the stranger appeared visibly tense and agitated. An idea occurred to Lu Yi, yet Li Baxin broke cover before he could convey to him what he had in mind, brandishing a flying shaft of light as he lunged at the 6th order with astonishing speed. Already on tenterhooks at first, being ambushed all of a sudden nearly sent the stranger into fits of panic as he frantically summoned whatever faculties he had at his disposal to put up as good a defense as he could. As they clashed, the backs of their hands emitted luminous glows of 2 different colors. The stranger immediately guessed Li Baxin's cultivation rank and glowered, "How dare you? A lowly 4th order like you?" He thrust a finger at Li Baxin, and several projectiles, flying weapons, rose into the air and swarmed after the latter, who immediately summoned his own shafts of light to intercept, eliciting a cacophonous clamor of cascading metallic clangs. Then Feng Yuechan came out of hiding to fire a spell from his flank, catching the lone 6th order by surprise that he needed to defend himself in a pathetic and ignoble state of desperation. The 6th and 7th order of the Cloud River realm might have sounded close, but the gap in strength was by no means small. At any rate, the lone 6th order could barely come close to boasting the same degree of talents and fundamentals as He Bing, who had, unlike this stranger, had ascended into the Cloud River realm with all 360 spiritual points unlocked. All this stranger managed at the time was 298. That made him a very weak 6th order. So weak that Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan alone were enough to give him a hard time. In fact, even Li Baxin alone could have defeated him. It did not take long for the enemy 6th order to realize that he was not dueling a pair of 4th orders of mediocre strength. His face squirmed from the growing fear and trepidation as he bemoaned his poor luck. He was trying to put as much distance between him and the site of the huge spiritual power eruption when he walked right into this ambush that had clearly been here for a long time. Clearly not one set specifically for him. He realized that it was he who stepped into the trap like a hare getting caught in a hunter's snare. But he would have gladly given away the item that the heavens had just bestowed upon him to bargain for his precious life, if only he could. He had tried tossing it away, but it stayed on him like a tumor. One that brought both despair and desolation in equal measures. He had tried looking for help too. He had been reaching out to some of the Thousand Demon Ridge elites, but none of them were willing to help. With the conclusion of the Colosseum now in the offing, the elites were all busy raking in as many Carnage points as possible, all so that they could secure a better position on the Carnage roster. No one heeded his call for aid. He blamed luck for visiting this fate upon him, of all people. What was already a dire situation for the lone Sixth Order took a turn for the worse, as if in response to his dismal and cynical outlook. His tingling senses warned him of danger coming from his back. But it was too late. A stab of pain coursed through every limb and he hurtled forward, crashing to the ground like a beaten dog. Lu Yi appeared at where the Sixth Order was standing with inviolable bristling with a fiery light. Drawing first blood enlivened Lu Yi enough to charge without fear. He lunged at his target with Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan holding up the rear with their flying shafts and spells poised to outflank the enemy. The lone Sixth Order scrambled to his feet, using his weapon to parry whatever bolts of light that pelted incessantly at him, but he missed one spell that hit him, blasting him off his feet. That gave Lu Yi the opening he needed. He dove forward and Inviolable sank its edge through the defenseless man. Blood spattered before the body even hit the ground. That's strange, Lu Yi mused. A Sixth Order that's surprisingly weak. The trio had collected plenty of experience in dealing with Sixth Orders in their many raids and ambushes on unsuspecting parties of enemy cultivators, yet they had never seen a Sixth Order as weak as this one. This stranger's fundamentals must be very limited, and his attempts at unlocking his spiritual points before his ascension into this realm must have been lackluster at best. Lu Yi and his comrades hurriedly set about gathering the spoils, swiftly stowing away the stranger's belongings and items. In a daring move, Lu Yi extended his hand into the dead man's robes, and as anticipated, he discovered a glistening gold amulet enveloped in a subtle cerulean glow. "Let's go!" barked Lu Yi, his voice resonating with urgency. Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan hurriedly followed suit, leaving behind the strewn ward flags and flagstones without a moment's hesitation. They had scarcely traveled 100 yards when a streak of light darted straight for them, materializing into a figure right before their eyes. Evidently, it was another cultivator, one that had detected the tumultuous clash and had decided to come this way to investigate. Lu Yi and his companions tensed, their bodies braced for an imminent confrontation with an unknown adversary. Thankfully, the battlefield imprints on the back of their hands remained dormant. The new stranger was an ally of the Grand Sky Coalition. He sensed the cultivation ranks of Lu Yi and his party, and snorted, signaling them to leave this place with haste. With a respectful bow, Lu Yi and his comrades swiftly retreated. Moments later, the echoes of a fierce skirmish reverberated from behind them. It seemed the formidable ally cultivator had crossed paths with Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators. The upheaval created by such a clash would undoubtedly capture the attention of more cultivators, drawing more dangers away from Lu Ye's position. Lu Yi and his companions darted into the shelter of a mountain cave. He activated a magical ward to conceal the signatures of their spiritual power and waited. At the first sign of trouble, he would activate the teleportation ward to shift them to another ward. Fortune seemed to favor them this time. Aside from the Grand Sky Coalition ally earlier, they encountered no one else. They were safe and no one had discovered them for now. With no one finding this cave, there was no need for them to teleport away just yet. But the din of battle never stopped resounding in the distance. Cultivators from both factions must have converged upon the location of the spiritual power surge just now, and that must have culminated into a huge battle. No one knew whose hands the unique gold amulet fell into. With its whereabouts now a temporary mystery, Lu Yi and his companions were safe. It was their luck when it was the bearer of the gold amulet himself who had walked right into their carefully laid ambush. And with him now dead, the gold amulet was lost. The first 2 hours passed, then another 2 hours. The tumult outside was gradually subsiding and Lu Yi and his party finally breathed more easily. In their respite, the trio turned their minds towards the spoils of their raid. Several storage bags lay before them, each yielding a disappointingly meager loot. However, one item shone above all, the heaven-sent gold amulet that was shining radiantly, its gentle azure luminescence an unmistakable emblem of its extraordinary nature. Lu Yi couldn't have fathomed that luck would once again grant him the opportunity to possess a gold amulet, the special and impossibly dangerous one. But given his past experiences, he now had more confidence in safeguarding this invaluable token. With a measure of good fortune on his side, he would succeed in holding on to it while staying alive. To most other cultivators, this unique gold amulet was more of a curse than a boon. It could not be used until the designated time period had elapsed, nor could it be stored away or even discarded, a ticking time bomb that could never be removed. Chapter 523 Salvation of the Jiang Brothers? Back when Lu Yi was chosen to be the bearer of his first unique gold amulet, he had tried almost everything, like throwing it away and using his teleportation ward to travel as far as possible from it. Nothing worked. The unique gold amulet remained physically inseparable like a tumor that obstinately refused to break away. It was more of a curse than a boon. Unless its bearer was killed, the gold amulet would forever follow him or her literally everywhere. Hence, being chosen to be the bearer of unique gold amulets was tantamount to being given a death sentence, especially for low-tier cultivators. Lu Yi had no intention of getting himself latched to another unique gold amulet and enduring its torments for another time. But by some ironic stroke of luck, this particular amulet had just dropped on his lap and there was nothing else he could do save to make the most of it. But not all was doom and gloom. If Lu Yi could repeat his earlier feat, then this encore could not only earn him an extra gold amulet but also enough carnage points to launch him back to the top spot on the roster. And that could be achieved with the help of his teleportation wards, so long as he had enough of them. There was only one glaring issue. Lu Yi had witnessed one spiritual power eruption from the amulet, but he did not know how many spiritual power eruptions he would still have to go through. There was no way of telling how many eruptions had occurred before. 6 hours breezed by swiftly. The gold amulet now cradled in Lu Ye's arms emitted the next pulse of spiritual power surge. The tremendous wave of energy swept across the terrain as a column of light tunneled up into the clouds overhead. There it was. Time to go. Without any hesitation, he activated the teleportation ward. But before they vanished from the cave, Lu Yi did not neglect to fire a spiritual power blast at the explosive ward not far away. Flames filled the entire length and breadth of the cave while a deafening thunderclap reverberated through the cavern. Lu Yi and his companions were gone, along with any traces of them being there before. Before too long, the place was swarming with cultivators investigating the energy pulse. But the mess and debris were all they could find. Meanwhile, Lu Yi and the others were just reappearing in the teleportation ward more than 200 miles away. The first thing Yi did was reconnoiter the area for any enemies. A message came from her soon enough. The coast was clear. They were safe. The trio waited there patiently. Another 6 hours elapsed. It was time for the next signal by the unique gold amulet, the next eruption of spiritual power in the column of light. Just like before, they triggered the explosive wards before using the teleportation ward, setting off another huge explosion. Lu Yi and his companions arrived at their destination, and the first thing Yi did was to scout around the area for any potential threats. In the meantime, Lu Yi tested his teleportation ward and made sure that it could still link with other nearby wards. To his dismay, there was only one still working. The unique gold amulet had already triggered twice. Plus the time when it was still in the possession of its former bearer, that would mean that the amulet had released its eruption thrice. Yet the soft emerald-like luminescence remained as radiant as ever, indicating that its duration had not yet ended. There would be another blast of light and spiritual power. The last one. The situation was by no means comforting. Without more than one option of exfiltration meant insecurity and greater risk. Anything could happen. The last functioning transportation ward might be discovered by someone else, triggering the explosive wards that would destroy it. If that were to really happen, then Lu Yi and his companions would be trapped. Realizing their fix, Lu Yi knew that he needed to venture out to construct more transportation wards. He spoke to Li Baxin about his plan, then he made himself invisible and slipped out of the cavern. He randomly chose a bearing and headed that way. There was little Li Baxin and the others could do to help. They could not render themselves invisible, so it would be best for him to go out alone while the others waited for him. 200 miles was not too far for Lu Yi to cover alone, but to remain undetected he would have to be extremely cautious, and that slowed him down a lot. That, plus searching for a suitable spot to build his new transportation ward, took him more than 2 hours before he could begin the actual work of constructing the ward. There was no time for another, so he turned around and headed back. He needed to regroup with the others. Back at the cave, Lu Yi waited patiently as the time finally came, the last eruption of that unique gold amulet. The pillar of light rose up in the blink of an eye, followed swiftly by a rolling tsunami of spiritual power, while Lu Yi and his companions made their swift exit, vanishing from the transportation ward. A split second later, they reappeared at the new transportation ward Lu Yi constructed not long ago. After ensuring that all was safe around them, Lu Yi quickly extracted the unique gold amulet. The faint azure glow was gone. He finally breathed a sigh of relief before stowing it away in his storage sphere. At the same time, Lu Ye's name on the Carnage roster soared up 2 positions, reclaiming his spot at the top of the list. His tally of Carnage points had skyrocketed by an astonishing 750 points, surpassing the 7,000th mark with a 200-point lead over second-ranking Sheng. Somewhere else, Sheng, dressed in a flowing green robe, lifted his head to observe the changes on the Carnage roster, his brows furrowing in consternation. He couldn't help but marvel at Lu Ye's incredible luck. Such a significant increase in bounty points must have been due to the possession of that unique gold amulet. And this wasn't the first time either. The last time Lu Yi had gained such a substantial spurt of Carnage points in one go, it catapulted him to the top of the Carnage roster too. In just a half-month, Lu Yi had acquired 2 unique gold amulets, displaying an extraordinary fortune that anyone would salivate with extreme jealousy. Sheng had heard the stories about Lu Yi, about how he was a member of the Crimson Blood sect of Bingzhou province and how he carried a huge price on his head from the numerous bounties offered by various sects and orders of the Thousand Demon Ridge Coalition. Many had been scouring the Carnage Coliseum grounds for him lately, but to no avail. He had managed to avoid detection the whole time. The 200 Carnage point difference wasn't an impossible task for Sheng, but he knew that catching up to Lu Yi wouldn't be easy. Lu Ye's cultivation rank might be low, yet it had contributed to his remarkable efficiency in gathering Carnage points that far outstripped Sheng's to the extent of perplexity. Having been overtaken, Sheng knew that he had to find other ways of amassing more Carnage points. The rewards for becoming the champion of the Carnage roster and those of the first runner-up differed significantly, the difference being a Primus-level wisp of sanctification. On the cusp of achieving the true Lake Realm, 9th Order Sheng might have little need for the wisp of sanctification at the onset of his imminent departure from the Cloud River battlefield. But he wanted it nonetheless, for the good of the juniors in his order if not for his own sake. As Sheng contemplated his plans, he received a message. He checked his battlefield imprint. It was sent to him by one of the juniors in his order. The message was brief. Someone had gone to great lengths to contact him through his juniors. All they wanted was to meet him somewhere in the Coliseum. But Sheng was more inclined to go on gathering as many Carnage points as possible to overtake Lu Yi. Time was of the essence and he wasn't interested in spending any of his valuable minutes meeting some strangers, especially strangers who were clearly weaklings since they had to go through layers of channels just to reach him. He was about to flatly refuse the request to meet when the next missive he received made his eyes twinkle with intrigue. He replied swiftly, "Are you sure about this? That's what they said?" His junior's response came soon enough. "Yes, that's what they said, but we don't know whether it's true or not. If they truly possess that item, then what they say could very well be possible. Get me their location." An approximate location of the strangers came soon enough. Sheng referred to his map. The meeting spot was quite a distance away from his current position. Even with his level of cultivation, it would take considerable effort and time to reach it. Nonetheless, there was no hesitation from him. "Tell them to wait there, I'm on my way." Concluding the communication, Sheng took to the sky, turning into a streak of light that zoomed in the direction of the agreed meeting point. In the meantime, perched atop the summit of a mountain were a pair of well-hidden figures. If Lu Yi were here, he would recognize the brothers Jiang Liuzi and Jiang Qingzi. Yet both of them presently appeared disheveled and battered, sporting injuries from their recent battles. Both proficient Fifth Orders in their own right, the brothers, like Lu Yi, were capable of defeating opponents beyond their ranks. For some time now, they had been led by an allied cultivator named Lu Shu, diligently searching the Coliseum for various opportunities and endowments as they sought to track down Lu Yi. Luck favored them at first, granting them ample chances and gifts. They hunted down cultivators from the Grand Sky Coalition, earning themselves a handsome amount of spoils in the process. Still, Lu Ye's whereabouts remained elusive, casting their quest for his head further into despair. If only those were the only difficulties they faced. But bad things come in threes. Just a day before, they came face to face with a powerful Grand Sky Coalition cultivator, and if the fact that his powers far surpassed them was not bad enough, the adversary even held a deep grudge against their sect. Needless to say, a fierce battle ensued. Their leader, 8th Order Lu Shu, possessed considerable strength, but he was still no match for the adversary, who was a 9th Order. Lu Shu should have been able to hold his ground under most circumstances. In fact, he could have escaped safely himself if he really wanted to. But with the blood feud between the adversary sect and their order, the enemy cultivator was determined to spill blood. That plus Lu Shu's resolve to keep the brothers safe forced him to stay and hold the enemy back while the brothers fled. By the time the brothers had reached a safe distance, it was too late. Lu Shu's battlefield imprint was gone. He was killed in combat. This left on the shoulders of the brothers the weight of guilt for causing the loss of their senior brother. Revenge was out of the question. The enemy Ninth Order's strength made it impossible for them to avenge Lu Shu, and all they could do was remain in hiding until the Colosseum reached its conclusion. Unfortunately for them, the enemy Ninth Order was not willing to stop there. He hunted around for their trail, tracking their movements and leaving the brothers in constant fear. With no other choices, they had to seek others for help. But anyone with enough power to resist the enemy Ninth Order was busy vying for the top spots on the Carnage roster. None of them were in a generous mood for charity, let alone altruistic enough to help keep the brothers safe. That prompted Jiang Liuzi to do everything he could to reach out to Tan Sheng. He was confident that the latter was strong enough to ensure their survival, plus, they knew how to make him say yes. Which was another stroke of luck. Not more than a day before, a white speck of light illuminated the spot where the Jiang brothers were hiding. It was an endowment event that had suddenly appeared right in front of them. It was from this pearly white speck of light that they stumbled upon a very extraordinary artifact. With this artifact in their possession, they were certain that Tan Sheng would undoubtedly agree to their request. The Jiang brothers expended every favor and dime just so that they could get into contact with Tan Sheng and were waiting for his response. Their hard work paid off. A message arrived soon enough. Jiang Liuzi quickly read the message. His brother Jiang Qingzi asked, "What's the news?" Jiang Liuzi nodded with solemnity, "It's a yes. But Tan Sheng is far away. The journey will take a half day by my reckoning." "That's good news, I guess. There is still hope for us." Few could fathom the joy and relief the brothers felt when they discovered what luck had just dropped on their lap in their hour of dire need. The very object of their salvation. Whether it was the rewards of winning the Carnage roster or the bounty on Lu Ye's head, the choice was easy enough for any Thousand Demon Ridge cultivator. Anyone would choose the latter without a moment's thought. For Tan Sheng, hunting down Lu Yi presented a twofold benefit. He could not only secure the top spot on the Carnage roster, but also the rich rewards for killing the famous Lu Yi. To that end, the brothers knew that there was little reason for him to decline to come. Tracking down Lu Yi had been the single most difficult challenge for all Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators who had entered the Colosseum with the express purpose of hunting him down. How could they even think of killing him when they could not even locate him? Yet, this quandary could be solved by the mysterious artifact that the heavens had just bestowed on the Jiang brothers. The uncanny ability to accurately pinpoint Lu Ye's current whereabouts was what impelled Tan Sheng to rush this way at once. Chapter 524 Exposed. A green-robed Tan Sheng arrived at his destination after his half-day-long journey. He had been full steam ahead all his way here, afraid that he might be too late. The Carnage Colosseum had been on for almost a half-month. That would mean that its end could come any time. If that were to happen, there would no longer be any point in trying to capture Lu Yi. The results of the Carnage roster would be determined by then, followed by the heavens' distribution of rewards. Tan Sheng extracted his map and ascertained his location. He was right. This was the place. He sent a message. It did not take long for a reply. He read it, murmuring its contents, "Where sun and moon do gently glide, twin rivers hand in hand abide." Deep inside he scowled at the code with scorn. Some lousy code. But as soon as he was finished, two figures stepped out of their hiding spots and came into view. His figure vanished with the winds, darting towards them and reappearing right before the two men in an instant. Jiang Liuzi stepped forward, his fists clasped in salute as he spoke. "Brother Tan Sheng, I presume?" The brothers had not met Tan Sheng before, hence they did not know what he looked like, but the secret code match and the spiritual power signature he emanated corresponded with what they knew about him. There was little chance for error. "You presume correctly," Tan Sheng nodded. "Where is it?" Jiang Liuzi took out an ancient-looking compass-like object from his storage bag. Exuding a timeless aura, the item looked just like any other ordinary object that most would rather just ignore without so much as a second glance. Yet this seemingly mundane compass held the key to accurately track Lu Ye's whereabouts, a significant opportunity that Jiang Liuzi and his brother had chanced upon. "Hand it over," Tan Sheng extended a hand. Though the item matched the descriptions of what he knew about it, he needed to verify it himself. We do not have a high cultivation rank, brother Tan Sheng, said Jiang Liuzi. And we have a formidable enemy cultivator still trying to hunt us down. It is for this reason that we need your help to keep us safe, sir. They couldn't surrender the compass to Tan Sheng. Not without risking him giving them the slip as soon as he got a hold of it and leaving them to fend for themselves. There was no need to ask for Tan Sheng's help to seek revenge for Lu Shu. Jiang Liuzi knew well the realm of impossibility that proposition inhabited. Tan Sheng might be a powerful Ninth Order, but so was the enemy cultivator who slew Lu Shu. Even if Tan Sheng were to agree to help, it would still be a very difficult undertaking for him to defeat someone of the same rank. Knowing that, Jiang Liuzi deftly refrained from mentioning this matter. They would take revenge by themselves one day. Both of them possessed exceptional talents, and the day where they would finally surpass the enemy in power and strength would surely come, and they would make him pay dearly. Lu Shu's death would be avenged then. In addition to our request for your protection, added Jiang Liuzi, we would like a 4/10 of the bounty on Lu Ye's head if this turns out to be a success. A cold glint flashed in Tan Sheng's eyes. Your appetite is quite voracious, my friend. Are you sure of making such a demand? You know as well as I do the number of bounties offered by all the sects and orders in our coalition. Jiang Liuzi spoke with confidence. Such a vast sum of rewards. Even if you were to give us 4/10 of the share, it would still be enough to last you a lifetime. Almost every Thousand Demon Ridge sect and order, especially those of tiers 1, 2 and 3, had pledged enough rewards to make the total bounty unimaginably humongous. Tan Sheng stared at the brothers pensively for several moments before he finally replied, surrender the item and you'll have my word. Jiang Liuzi shook his head. I think it's best if we hold on to the compass ourselves. They needed Tan Sheng to be around. Only that would dissuade the enemy cultivator from attacking them. If they gave Tan Sheng the compass, he could zoom off without them, leaving them to be helpless sheep ready to be slaughtered. That would mean the end of everything they had worked so much for. To that end, Jiang Liuzi needed to be firm, even if it meant aggravating Tan Sheng. At the very least, being fellow members of the Thousand Demon Ridge would prevent Tan Sheng from just killing them both and running off with the compass. But Jiang Liuzi was nevertheless prepared for such an eventuality. If Tan Sheng were to have malicious intentions, then Jiang Liuzi would not hesitate to destroy the compass. Seeing Tan Sheng in doubt, Jiang Liuzi spoke again. The Colosseum has been open for almost a half-month now, brother Tan Sheng. Lose any more time and we might not be able to track down Lu Yi in time for you to regain your spot at the top of the Carnage roster. Especially since the conclusion of the Colosseum would mean that Lu Yi would be free to escape. Even with the tracking ability of this compass, he could be anywhere and we'll still not find him by then. Lu Yi could just as easily slip inside one of the many Divine Trade Association branches to evade capture, or he could just return to the real world of Jiuzhou. Finally, Tan Sheng relented. 2/10, nothing more. You can have that ruddy compass to yourselves, but I'll stay with you both until the end. Jiang Liuzi did not like it at all, but he knew better than to argue. 2/10 of the whole bounty was nevertheless handsome enough for him and his brother. Very well then, he agreed. Let's begin, pressed Tan Sheng anxiously. Jiang Liuzi lifted a hand and bit the tip of his finger. Even the strange sensation from before was gone as if it had never existed. Lu Yi was both shocked and apprehensive. Was that all just a figment of his imagination? He sat there quietly once more, regaining his composure before he projected his spiritual senses once more. There really were no signs of anything amiss. He had to admit that since getting the unique gold amulet, his luck had taken a dive. After almost a day, no one had passed by at all. Lu Yi looked up into the sky. He peered at the morbid red banner hanging high up in the ether. Tan Sheng's carnage points tally had not been changing at all for almost the entire day, giving enough chance for the second runner-up to catch up. At the moment, all that was needed was a mere 100 carnage points to unseat Tan Sheng from the second placing of the carnage roster. Minutes turned into hours, and after 2 the same feeling came back. Lu Yi could feel that someone was watching him, and the foreboding dread was palpably stronger than before. His expression tensed with solemnness. Something is definitely wrong. If it was just once, he could have brushed it off as a mere sense of illusion. But for it to happen again was something altogether different. He probed his surroundings with glyph, insight once more. Still he found nothing. But awash with the growing sense of foreboding, he felt exposed. If anything, it felt like a warning, urging him to leave before danger arrives. Lu Yi immediately sent a message to Li Baxin, urging him to prepare for a retreat. Even if it was just him being oversensitive, it was better to be cautious and not leave things to chance. Just as he was communicating with Li Baxin, 3 figures were rapidly approaching his location from several miles away, referring to the guidance of a compass that emitted a glow that was slowly turning into a deep crimson as they were closing in on their target. "He's close," Jiang Liuzi exclaimed, his eyes glinting with delight. Even with the compass, he had anticipated that the hunt across the vast terrain of the Colosseum would take quite some time. But to his amazement, they had managed to reach Lu Yi in just over an hour. What a fortuitous surprise. Lu Yi was just finishing his message to Li Baxin and was about to pack up his ward flags to leave when he noticed 3 streaks of light hurtling toward him. The leader exuded an incredibly powerful spiritual power effusion, unmistakably a 9th order. Since when do 9th orders operate in teams? Lu Yi gasped with consternation. Then he realized from the spiritual power discharge of the 2 other cultivators with the 9th order that they were just a pair of 5th orders. So they might be members of the same sect. Why else would a 9th order be accompanying 2 lowly 5th orders? Lu Yi was half expecting them to just fly over his head. But before he could exhale with relief, all 3 men stopped overhead. Hovering in the sky above, Jiang Liuzi held out the compass, his gaze fixed on the trembling pointer jerking around. He growled, "He's just below." Tan Sheng's eyes lit up, and he swiftly descended towards the ground, followed closely by the Jiang brothers behind him. They barely hit the ground when Jiang Qingzi vanished. As a ghost cultivator, it was imperative that he remained concealed for tactical advantage. Lu Yi was staring at Jiang Qingzi. He had met Wei Kei earlier, but he did not expect the Jiang brothers to be here as well. What a circus this had become. But what scared and perturbed Lu Yi the most was the compass Jiang Liuzi was holding onto. The same sense of foreboding from earlier seemed like a form of etheric connection between that compass and him. For reasons still unknown, Lu Yi couldn't shake off the feeling that they were here to find him. Why else would they have nearly flown past him only to stop overhead just now? Why of all places had they chosen to land here? The fact that Jiang Liuzi was referring to his compass as if he was looking for something, or someone, specific lent further credence to this theory. Chapter 525 The Tracking Disc. Jiang Liuzi stood 10 meters away from Lu Ye's position with his compass cradled in his hand. It was now shining a deep crimson, its needle firmly fixed at Lu Yi. The former looked up abruptly, exclaiming, "He's right ahead." His voice barely fell when Lu Yi exposed himself, dashing forward with glyph. Windwalk activated and inviolable hacking down on Jiang Liuzi in a deadly arc. He had no idea what that compass was for, but one thing was certain, he was exposed and it was all because of it. The Jiang brothers must have been using it to track him down. That would mean he needed to seize that compass. Seeing the steel gleaming at just a mere hair's breadth from him frightened Jiang Liuzi. The memory of his last defeat in Lu Ye's hands remained vivid and fresh in his mind, and because of that, he knew all too well the strength of Lu Yi. Instinctively he staggered backward to evade the blow. Tan Sheng beside him sprang into action, unleashing a huge burst of spiritual power barreling straight at Lu Yi. Such was the formidable strength of a 9th order. The blast caught Lu Yi squarely, sending his figure hurtling away like a rag doll. But Lu Yi was not defeated just yet. Even as his internal energies churned violently deep inside, he groped as he was still in midair, conjuring a ward flag he had kept hidden and swung it vigorously. 8 beams of light shot up from the ground and into the sky, interconnecting and resonating with each other as they formed a dome-like energy field that covered an area in excess of 100 meters wide. Lu Yi effortlessly phased through the wall of light as he stumbled out, leaving Tan Sheng, who had bolted forward in pursuit, trapped inside. A trap ward. Tan Sheng gasped, astonished. He hadn't expected that someone had set up a trap ward here in advance, and for that, he was now confined inside. Swish swish. A pair of whistles sliced through the air. It was Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan breaking cover and soaring into the air. Seeing Lu Yi using his trap ward was sign enough that they were up against someone more powerful than them. Immediately they sped after Lu Yi, joining him in their flight away. Tan Sheng's eyes flashed with a shade of regret as the trio bolted away in streaks of light and disappeared in the distance. He had almost managed to kill that all-elusive Lu Yi, but alas, here he was, thwarted by a trap, and there was little he could do. He hurled spell after spell at the ward, pounding the wall of light so rapidly that ripples spread and intertwined with one another as the radiance of the wall of light began to dim at a noticeable pace. Jiang Liuzi helped to bring down the ward too. Having the compass might allow them to track down Lu Yi, but the last thing he wanted was to delay it in case more variables came into play. Especially if Lu Yi were to get himself caught and killed by another 1,000 Demon Ridge elite who happened to be passing by. Then everything they had done would have been for naught. But the strength of Lu Ye's trap wards could barely keep Wei Kei inside for long, let alone an invincible Ninth Order like Tan Sheng. Barely 20 seconds elapsed and the dome of light diminished like twilight. As soon as the ward crumbled, Tan Sheng and Jiang Liuzi took off into the sky in hot pursuit. It did not take long for them to be joined by a third figure, the ghost cultivator Jiang Qingzi. Lucky enough to not have been caught inside the trap ward when it was activated gave him the chance to surreptitiously shadow Lu Yi and his companions when they were making their escape. But he did not dare to stay close. If he were discovered, he would have been outnumbered 3-1. There. I saw them landing somewhere around that spot. Jiang Qingzi exclaimed, his finger pointing in the direction their quarry had vanished. Before he even finished, all three of them felt the earth and the trees beneath them shaking, followed swiftly by the blast of an explosion. Jiang Qingzi was stunned as a sense of déjà vu gripped him. He could have sworn that he had seen something like this before, but where he could not quite remember. But Tan Sheng did not spare a moment's delay. He dove forward with the Jiang brother closely behind. They barely made more than 100 meters when Jiang Liuzi yelped with disbelief, yanking himself back to an abrupt halt as he cried, "Wait, brother Tan." Tan Sheng stopped at once. "What is it?" he asked irately. "The disc's pointer?" "It's indicating that Lu Yi's in that direction," said Jiang Liuzi, his hand pointing somewhere else as he could hardly pry his stare away from the compass in his hand. Somewhere else, a direction that was nowhere near where the flaming detonation happened. "Didn't you say you saw them landing there?" Tan Sheng glowered at Jiang Qingzi. "I did," Jiang Qingzi replied, "saw it with my own eyes." "Unless something's wrong with the disc," he added, even though he has full confidence in his brother's control of the magical compass. Yet bafflingly enough, the disc's pointer was aimed in another direction as if in pure sardonic mockery. "We'll go and have a look," Tan Sheng made his call decisively, choosing to ignore the compass first. After all, the source of the detonation was not more than just a few miles away. Checking it first won't take too long. The Jiang brothers naturally had no objections. The trio quickly made their way together and found a cave still filled with dancing swirls of dust and disarrayed clutter of debris fresh after an explosion. Jiang Qingzi studied the environs inside the cave. Something about it felt awfully familiar to him. In the meantime, a newly appearing Lu Yi who had just escaped here using his teleportation ward wasn't amused or pleased. He was being followed by a Ninth Order no less. What that compass was that Jiang Liuzi held in his grasp he did not know. But he was even more bothered by how he could feel some inexplicable and yet peculiar sort of mental connection between him and that mysterious compass. Sensing the confusion now boggling Lu Yi, Li Baxin broke his silence. "That's a tracking disc, brother." "A tracking disc?" A baffled Lu Yi frowned. Hearing the name of the compass was enough for him to know what its function was. A magical item that can be used to track down individuals. Extremely rare, it works by using a drop of blood, the user's, to write down the target's name on it. The disc's pointer points in the direction of the individual's location. "I've only heard about it. This is the first time seeing one up close." "Extremely rare, eh? And they're willing to use it on me? That's great." And it was held by Jiang Liuzi, indicating that he was the owner of the disc. Regret now gnawed at his heart, reflecting on his earlier failure to wrest the tracking disc from Jiang Liuzi's grasp. How he wished he could have seized it and rid himself of this crisis. Does that mean that they will be able to locate me wherever I go as long as they have the tracking disc in their possession? "Yes," Li Baxin answered solemnly. "What the heck is this? Since when do we even have such a vendetta?" Lu Yi grumbled in frustration. Lu Yi and the Jiang brothers shared no significant personal enmity. Their prior clashes merely sprung from disputes over territorial claims of arcane glades. Yet, inexplicably, the Jiang seemed to have clung on to a tenacious obsession, to the extent of enlisting the aid of a Ninth Order in their bid for vengeance, a clear declaration of their resolute wish for his head. From their point of view, the handsome bounty on Lu Ye's head was reason enough for them to want to kill him, an immense reward that had burdened him since his humble days when he was still a cultivator of the Fifth Order of the Spirit Creek realm. Be that as it might, that did not prevent Lu Yi from having a pang of resentment simmering like a hidden ember beneath the surface of his contemplative heart. And that Ninth Order just now, that's Tan Sheng, a gifted cultivator of the revered New Moon sect. He's good, Li Baxin allowed with measured gravity. Huh. That's Tan Sheng? Lu Yi stammered in astonishment. Despite now occupying the first and second positions of the Carnage roster, Lu Yi had never seen Tan Sheng before and he did not know what he looked like. What a twist of fate it was that the very person Jiang Liuzi had enlisted for help would turn out to be none other than Tan Sheng himself. With the revelation now unraveled, Tan Sheng was obviously not driven solely by the allure of the bounty but also by an insatiable ambition to claim the top spot of the Carnage roster. Succeed in vanquishing Lu Yi and all glory and riches would be his. The endless cycle of seeing cultivators leaving the Spirit Creek realm during Li Baxin's time in the Spirit Creek battlefield had etched their visages like indelible marks upon the annals of his memory. That was how he recognized Tan Sheng. And since Li Baxin described him as good and gifted, then he must be a cultivator who had once had his name celebrated upon the Spirit Creek battlefield's roll of supremacy. We must not linger in this place, brother. With the tracking disc, it will be a matter of time before they come to find us. We need to leave this place quickly, Li Baxin warned, his words resounding like an urgent clarion call in the face of impending danger. Any Ninth Order could easily range at 200-mile distance in a short time, especially with the impetus now driving Tan Sheng. With a nod of determination, Lu Yi softly called out, addressing his comrades, Brother Baxin, Sister Yuechan. They turned their attentive gazes toward him, their expressions mirroring their curiosity. Amidst the tension, an earth-shattering eruption ensued. A brilliant display of power and prowess as inviolable slid out of its sheath, releasing a resplendent crimson crescent of light slicing through the air, a lethal arc of morbid elegance screaming towards them. In a reflexive surge of survival instinct, Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan deftly evaded the deadly trajectory. Li Baxin's features contorted with concern as he realized that they were already outside the magical circle of the teleportation ward. He called out to Lu Yi both fervently and urgently, Lu Yi! The teleportation ward, a mechanism of both wonder and magic, bathed in radiant luminescence, whisking away Lu Yi's figure as if he was swallowed by a vortex of light. Li Baxin rushed to the teleportation ward and tried to channel his spiritual power into it. But it was no use, the teleportation ward refused to respond. When Lu Yi constructed the magical ward, he included a few additions so that the wards could not be misused, meaning the teleportation wards only responded to his spiritual power and no one else's. Under the solemn guise of the mask of a boy, Li Baxin wore a pensive look. Feng Yuechan too discerned Lu Yi's intentions, her voice laden with understanding. He doesn't want to endanger us, does he? With the tracking disc now detecting his every movement, Lu Yi's position would no longer be safe, even with the teleportation wards. The odds were stacked against him with little chance of luck smiling upon him, unless he possessed an extensive network of wards that would allow him to outmaneuver his pursuers. However, should Tan Sheng catch up to him, the vast disparity in their cultivation ranks would render him as helpless as a lamb ready for slaughter, whether Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan were with him or not. That was why he chose to force Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan out of the teleportation ward so that he could slip away alone. That imminent perils waiting for him in the forthcoming was evident and he did not want to drag them into his grave with him. And if he could choose he would have left even Amber with them too. Yet, since he had forged the bond of life-energy art with Amber, their life and death had become inseparably linked. Should he perish, Amber would also meet its doom, and he would too share the same fate. Therefore, there was no reason to not bring Amber with him, especially since beast mode might come in handy, to say nothing of the fact that had proven herself vigilant and reliable in her ability to scope out nearby environs. Damn it! An exasperated Li Baxin lamented, feeling the weight wrenching at his heart. As a senior brother, he could not bear seeing Lu Yi confronting such perils alone. Yet, Lu Yi's decisive action had left them no time for contemplation. Li Baxin could only marvel at his junior's resolute nature. Even in the face of dire adversity, Lu Yi was able to make swift and firm decisions, acting with alacrity as soon as he comprehended the gravity of his predicament. An alert from his battlefield imprint prompted Li Baxin to examine it at once. It really was as he expected, a message from Lu Yi. What did he say? Asked Feng Yuechan. That we're too slow, we'd just be dragging him down? A vexed Li Baxin yelped with frustration. Feng Yuechan fell silent, well aware that this was not truly Lu Yi's sentiment. It was just his ploy to alleviate the burden of guilt in their minds. But Lu Yi has a set of plans, it seems, Li Baxin murmured as he read the rest of the message's contents. He proceeded to share the details with Feng Yuechan. Feng Yuechan nodded pensively. So, it appears that Lu Ye's actions weren't just reckless impulses after all. They were the result of careful deliberation. If everything goes as he planned, he might just succeed in surviving this relentless pursuit. And for that to happen, the plan hinged on the timing of the Colosseum's ending. But who could possibly predict when the Carnage Colosseum would close? Chapter 526 Tan Sheng's Choice. As Feng Yuechan had surmised, Lu Ye's decision was not a mere act of fleeting courage. He embarked alone on the path of escape already with a well-thought-out plan in mind. And his primary concern, of course, was to spare his companions from further danger. Confronting a formidable Ninth Order elite like Tan Sheng was well beyond what their combined strength was capable of. To find his glimmer of hope for survival, Lu Yi knew that he could do nothing but endure the relentless pursuit for as long as possible. The key lay in the imminent closure of the Carnage Colosseum. If he could stay alive until the Colosseum ended, he could make his way to the nearest Divine Trade Association where he would find safety and refuge. Aware of the ever-looming possibility of the Carnage Colosseum's closure, Lu Ye's immediate objective was to stall for as long as he could. After communicating with Li Baxian, Lu Yi swiftly used his teleportation wards to travel as far as he could, doing his best to widen the distance between himself and Tan Sheng. After 4 successive teleportations, he had put at least several hundred miles between him and his pursuers. Standing in the last teleportation ward circle, Lu Yi could no longer detect any additional wards ahead. Over the course of these events, many of the wards he had set up must have suffered damage, and consequently, only a few remained functional. Without hesitation, he stepped out of the cave housing the final teleportation ward and took to the skies at once, flying in the opposite direction from where he came. He dared not fly too high nor make too much noise, especially since the enemies that abounded the Colosseum extended beyond Tan Sheng. Every Thousand Demon Ridge cultivator in the Colosseum was thirsty for his blood now. Lu Yi remained vigilant at all times in all directions. His senses, both physical and spiritual, were heightened to the utmost so that he could hide at the first notice of disturbance. After more than 2 hours, Lu Yi finally came to a halt and began setting up new teleportation wards. The more wards he has, the more assurance he would have to contend with Tan Sheng and others, a form of insurance to ensure his survival. While he was engrossed in setting up the teleportation wards hundreds of miles away, Tan Sheng and the Jiang brothers were rapidly closing the distance, all thanks to the guidance of the tracking disc. Being a powerful Ninth Order, Tan Sheng had nothing to fear and there was no need for him to be discreet, unlike Lu Yi, and that allowed him to travel much faster. By the time Lu Yi was done with the teleportation ward, Tan Sheng was no more than 400 miles away from his position. However, Tan Sheng's expression was not anywhere near pleased nor amused. Indeed, the needle had changed, now pointing back in the direction they had come from. Furrowing his brow and pondering for a moment, he turned to Jiang Liuzi and asked, "Has the tracking disc been damaged in any way?" The tracking disc might be a valuable magical instrument, but it wasn't exactly sturdy enough to withstand impacts and collisions. Any knocks or bumps could have a high chance of rendering it faulty. Plus, Tan Sheng's question made Jiang Liuzi aware that he was not the only one to suspect that the tracking disc might be broken. Even Tan Sheng was wondering about that possibility too. "No. It hasn't been bumped or knocked on anywhere before," Jiang Liuzi shook his head. "Brother Tan Sheng," Jiang Qingzi interjected, "the tracking disc should still be functioning properly. If there's anything worth suspecting, I'd say it's that Lu Yi." Tan Sheng pondered that statement for a moment and realized the possibility of truth in Jiang Qingzi's claims. The tracking disc had worked in leading them to Lu Yi in the first time. But it was due to the trap ward that they lost their chance to seize him. Therefore, it was logical to believe that the problem did not likely stem from the tracking disc. "What do you mean?" Tan Sheng inquired. "I'm not entirely sure, but I wonder if he has the means to instantaneously shift himself through distances as far as several hundred miles," Jiang Qingzi suggested. "That's ridiculous. No Cloud River Realm cultivator could do that." Tan Sheng scoffed. "With the help of some magical artifact perhaps?" Jiang Qingzi proposed. They could think of no other way to explain the peculiar ability of Lu Yi to traverse vast distances in just the blink of an eye. The tracking disc was clearly indicating their imminent arrival, but before they could catch up to him, he suddenly shifted to the opposite direction. Tan Sheng furrowed his brow in contemplation. As much as he did not want to admit it, he could barely deny that while Jiang Qingzi's speculation seemed unrealistic, it definitely sounded like the most plausible explanation for now. Lu Yi hailed from the infamous Crimson Blood sect of Bingzhou province, the very same martial order that was once a name that invoked great fear and respect across all of Jiuzhou, the realm of the 9 provinces. Its strength might have declined since then, but who knew what hidden heritage they still possessed? It wasn't entirely impossible that the sect could have kept some unknown artifact capable of instantaneous conveyance across over several hundred miles. But Tan Sheng had never heard of such an artifact before, making it difficult for him to confirm that explanation. If he's really relying on some magical artifact, then I'm sure, as a drawback of such a potent artifact, it must have the weakness of being unable to be utilized frequently. To that end, Brother Tan Sheng, I believe that we just need to keep pressuring him. Sooner or later, there will come a moment when we will corner him like a cat catching a vole, Jiang Qingzi suggested. Continue the pursuit. Tan Sheng growled, feeling a surge of annoyance as he immediately wheeled around and headed back to where they came from. His rank on the Carnage roster had plunged down to 3rd place, much to his frustration. What should have been an easy hunt for Lu Yi with the tracking disc, which should have secured him the top spot on the roster and untold riches and prestige, had just turned into a wild goose chase. To say nothing of slipping down the rung on the roster after all the time and effort. With the situation as it was, it had become nearly impossible for him to amass enough Carnage points to contend for the top spot on the roster. But if compared to the rewards of being the winner of the Carnage roster, the bounty and fame for being the one to slay Lu Yi were undoubtedly more tempting. In the heart of a remote valley almost a day later, 3 weary figures sat in a meditative stance, shrouded in an atmosphere of tension and exhaustion. Jiang Luzi and his brother's faces betrayed their apprehension, but it was Tan Sheng's frustration and irritation that matched the ominous clouds that gathered above them. The past 24-hour pursuit had been a grueling marathon, as they doggedly followed the elusive trail of the slippery Lu Yi. Despite their best efforts of traveling back and forth, retracing their steps repeatedly, and yet coming up empty-handed, all 3 of them came no closer to laying eyes on Lu Yi. Every time they thought they were gaining closer to Lu Yi, the compass's needle would abruptly and mercilessly alter its course, and they were left with no choice but to recalibrate their trajectory to continue the snipe hunt. Even the formidable Tan Sheng, a seasoned 9th Order cultivator at the pinnacle of the Cloud River realm, felt the strain of this fruitless and yet relentless pursuit. In the meantime, the Jiang brothers were utterly spent, their once vibrant countenances now a pallid reflection of their former selves. They would not even have a whit of spiritual power left enough to use telekinesis if they did not stop to rest. Desperation and bewilderment plagued their restless meditation as they pondered the enigma of Lu Yi's seemingly impossible elusiveness. Could Lu Yi indeed possess such a convenient artifact? One that was really capable of instantaneous teleportation over vast distances? If such a magical treasure existed, then their quest for his head would be nothing but a mere pipe dream. With such a potent talisman in his possession, Lu Yi could easily evade capture so long as he wasn't being fully encircled by foes. An awkward silence lingered over the 3 as they mulled over this daunting possibility. Jiang Liuzi and his brother traded furtive and sour glances. Tan Sheng was here by their invitation upon the promise of success. Yet they found themselves empty-handed, and to their dismay, the 3 companions felt like mere pawns in a grand game, toyed around with like monkeys. Before too long, Tan Sheng's ranking had plummeted further down to the 4th place on the Carnage roster while Lu Yi's name was now in the 2nd. From the looks of things, their names would continue sliding in an unstoppable descent. The situation was far from ideal for both of them. One was on the hunt and the other in desperate flight, leaving no room nor time for them to stop and gather more Carnage points. Seated not far away from the brothers, Tan Sheng raised his hand and placed a finger upon his battlefield imprint, seemingly engaged in urgent communication with someone unknown. After a brief moment, he turned his gaze to Jiang Liuzi and barked, extending a demanding hand, "The tracker disc. Now." Jiang Liuzi guessed his intent immediately, his brow furrowing with concern. "Wait, are you thinking of using its other function, Brother Tan Sheng?" Tan Sheng nodded solemnly, retorting quietly, "Unless you have other ways of tracking down Lu Yi? But that would mean it's open season on Lu Yi. We're not going to be the only ones pursuing Lu Yi, Brother Tan." Jiang Liuzi voiced his concern, a sudden realization washing over him. "You were in contact with other elites in the Colosseum, weren't you, Brother Tan?" Again Tan Sheng acknowledged this, confirming, Indeed, I have disseminated the message and struck agreements with the others. Whoever manages to capture and slay Lu Yi shall yield 2/10 of the whole bounty to me. Your shares will be derived from my cut. Their initial arrangement entitled Jiang Liuzi and his brother a direct 2/10 of the full bounty. But with this new arrangement, their share had been forcibly shrunken down to the paltry 2/10 of Tan Sheng's 2/10, which was a drastic abatement of what they were originally promised. Jiang Liuzi's heart swelled with reluctance. Surely there are better approaches to this situation, Brother Ta? He feebly attempted to voice his disagreement. We are running out of time, snapped Tan Sheng stubbornly. The Colosseum has been open for 17 days. We don't know when it will close. Could be any time. If that happens and we're still nowhere near to catching Lu Yi, then all we sacrificed will have been for nothing. Besides, it's too late to say no now. I have already spread the message and there are people who are eager for success. If and when we catch him, you'll have your cut of the reward. It should be handsome enough, and let us not succumb to greed. Tan Sheng had made a daring gamble. With his ranking on the Carnage roster plummeting and the prizes now nothing more than dissipating vapor, Tan Sheng's only way of recovering was through hunting down and slaying Lu Yi that the costs would be covered. Jiang Liuzi heaved a sigh, recognizing that the Ninth Order would brook no objection to the new plan, rendering further persuasion futile. Resentment churned within him, but he had no choice but to surrender the tracking disc. That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.